Look at that big old fella. Look at that big old fella. My God. You don't know who you are. You don't know what it's all about. You are alone. The enemy inside you. It's an enemy that's inside of you. Enemies, archons inside you. It's cool. You don't have to put with it. Put up with more. There's an enemy inside of you. Liquid Maze. Liquid Maze is the name of the band. And they are an awesome band. It's called Liquid Maze. Like the corn. Maize. What are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to do what we've been doing the past couple of days. We're going to listen to some good information. I'll read a little bit about this stuff. The Gergesene demoniac. Mark 5.20 is one of the versions. Subject of demons and demon possession has always seemed somewhat remote and academic to sophisticated 20th century Americans. Boy, are we marked. Bible-believing Christians have always accepted the fact that demons and their activities in New Testament times, but most of us are inclined to relegate demonic activity in these days to pagan lands. Wink, wink, wink. And you thought you were not in a pagan land. And missionary experiences. Of course, you got to blame the pagans for it, all right. Don't want to blame the real dudes. The ones that are floating around you, inside you. But we can stand up against them. Recent years, the matter has been getting uncomfortably close to home. My office mate of several years back was interrupted by a young and very zealous new Christian teacher, accompanied by a student from whom she wanted her friend to cast out a demon. Not long after that, while I was still a student in the seminary, there was a car parked by the seminary, or cemetery, depending how you want to say it, in a somewhat suspicious matter, and I called the police to check it out. 5 squad cars converged on it. I felt somewhat guilty, particularly fearing that I might have created an unintentional hardship for some classmate. A friend of mine told me later that 2 students were attempting to cast out a demon out, of a fellow. A fellow, huh? I have always wondered what my Christian brothers have to say to the police officers by way of explanation. Like it or not, demons and demonic activity are likely to become much more of a concern to you in the days to come. Then he goes in and bastardizes the scriptures. Anyways, what we're going to listen to is Jerry Marzinsky and Tony Saya in their interview talking about, of all things, schizophrenia and entity attachment. Now, it doesn't just have to be that, and people get all those sorts of labels and stuff. Don't be scared off of this. This is a great conversation. A lot of great information if you're willing to listen. And if you don't want to listen, I understand that too. There we go. By the way, sovereignty. Just one thing I learned about my spiritual warfare, that when I got pissed off and I said I had enough of being afraid, and I told them off, not only in the name of Jesus and the blood of Jesus, but I told them off and I told them to get the F out. Guess what happened? They got out.
Good afternoon and evening. To another podcast. I'm really excited about today's guest.
Sorry about the audio.
Before we get into it though, guys, if you're new to the channel, please consider liking, subscribing and sharing this information if you find it helpful. It really does help.
That's loud. Except the audio that they're talking, that's not loud.
Today's guest is Jerry Marzinsky. Hi there, Jerry. How you doing?
I'm doing good today.
Really excited to have you on. Really ties nicely with some of the stuff that I've been talking about over the recent months in terms of mental health and entities and how they're attached. Just to let our listeners know, Jerry is a licensed psychotherapist with over 35 years of experience working with schizophrenic and other psychiatric.
Tell me, folks, can you hear it? Is it too loud?
Hospitals, prisons,
not loud enough?
Emergency rooms. Worked in the largest mental health unit in Central State Hospital.
They're making it difficult on me.
Also held other positions in Arizona State Prison and Sonora.
Yeah, thanks a lot, TikTok.
In psychology, psychiatry, and substance abuse. So it's quite a CV there, Jerry.
Is that any
if
better?
Anyone's an expert on this subject, I assume it would be you. You've had a lot of experience working with these patients. So where did it all start for you?
Well, it started, where it really started was when I was a kid. And I learned not to trust authority. It was just one incident after another, where just something happened where I can't trust it. I can't trust this one. I can't trust this one. And the last one left was my dad had kind of programmed me to believe that college professors were like gods. So end up in Temple University and going through the psychology program there. And And then I went 2 or 3 years, and then I ran into this most egotistical professor I've ever seen. It wasn't even in my major. It was an elective. And this guy really did something really nasty to the entire class. I mean, he lied to us and said, okay, he put all these things on the board. I mean, it was an ancient history class. And the book was like, foot thick. And this was, it wasn't even, it was an elective. And he said, okay, this stuff is not going to be on the test. Turned out he put about 2/3 of it on the test.
Oh, wow.
And the entire class got slammed. And I was like, I was furious. I was absolutely furious. And, there went that one. So past that point,
Good job. Finally got
here's all
it.
the stuff coming out. What I hated
Savannah.
about undergraduate psychology is you didn't have access to the clinical population. The only thing you could really check out with what they were saying was in experimental psychology, where you could go in there and you could play with the rats and you could run these different things and you could see what was happening. But everything else you had to take their word for it. And I didn't like that since, especially after that one professor. So you look in the back of the psych book and you go, where'd they get this information? And it was like, this guy got it from this guy, got it from this guy, who got it from this guy, who got it from this guy. And very few of them were out on the front lines in clinics. They were academics. And, I'm like, shoot, it's like, you said you were scuba diving. I remember one time I was down on the bottom, and here's this little colony of these little fish that have these little mounds. And they stick their heads out of the mounds. And then when one left to steal a rock from another to add to his mound, another fish came and stole his little rock. And I'm fascinated with this. I didn't even know why. The only ones that were bringing in new rocks were the ones on the edge of the colony.
Yeah.
They were bringing in new material. And the rest were just stealing it from each other. And I saw that and I went, that's what these guys are doing.
Yeah.
They're just, they're just taking this and it's like, intellectual incest. And very few of them were clinicians, that had spent any significant time out on the front lines of mental health. I mean, they might have been student counselors, but most of them were academics. So it's like, hey.
Isn't it scary though how, like you said, people don't question it. They get a textbook and they just learn whatever's in this textbook and they treat it as gospel. And so this Chinese whispers gets passed along, and it's, propagated as truth. And everyone's saying the same thing as you say. No one's bringing new rocks to the party. So you had some deep-rooted suspicions straight off the bat. Then it sounds like.
Well, yeah, and then there were a couple of them. There's still an undergraduate psych where we were assigned this one research article to read, where this psychologist who said that if two crazy people were to encounter each other with the same delusion, so if both of them believed they were Genghis Khan, one of them would have to give way and change that delusion to something else. And I'm like, why would they have to do that? They're both crazy. What would foster such a thing? And I'm kind of looking through this article to see why this guy said this. And he just said it. I mean, it was just, so fast forward probably 15, 20 years, I was working in Central State Hospital. It was the biggest psychiatric institution in the world at the time I got there.
On that video you sent me the link, this place is huge. For listeners out there, just Google the images, and it's a massive place.
Yeah, it was like 2,000 acres and over 200 buildings. There were probably over 10,000 psychiatric patients there when I first arrived. So I was assigned to one of the psychiatric wards, and one day I was making my rounds on the second floor. This big old brick building, like 100 years old, And I'm looking for new patients and patients that were rehabilitatable, so that we could send over to the rehab center and perhaps get a job.
Can I just interrupt there? What is classed as rehabilitation according to that system?
Well, what we had was a vocational rehabilitation system on the grounds
Thank you, Savannah, for the
state
lights.
hospital. So what our job was to find the highest functioning psychiatric patients that we could find, that we thought we could train and give a vocational skill to, and then get them out of the hospital with a job. Okay. So we were constantly searching for those high functioning patients that we could perhaps get out of there. I was making the rounds one day, and here's this new psychiatric patient walking back and forth through this big day room. So there was a day room, and then 4 big wings came off where the patients lived. And this guy's walking around talking to himself. I kind of crept up there, and I was listening to his conversation. And it was like he was hearing voices, and it was like listening to one side of a telephone conversation. You know, you're listening to somebody talking, and they're responding to somebody. And it wasn't, what do you call it, verbal cabbage or garbage, or it was a coherent conversation. I mean, who or whatever he was talking to was talking back to him.
Yeah.
And then he saw me, and I introduced myself, and I said, "You're new. I haven't seen you here before. What's your name?" And he looks at me now, and he goes, "I'm Jesus Christ."
Right.
Oh, okay. I said, looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, then you're not Jesus Christ, because I am." And I'm waiting to see what that guy said 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and I'm sitting there with like, okay, what's going to happen next?
Was that a protocol thing to say, or was it just was that the rebel in you just kind of?
That was the rebel in me, kind of like, okay, well, here's my chance to check out what this guy said 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Because it stuck in my head, and I'm sitting there kind of watching him, like, what's he going to do? I mean, is he going to change his delusion like this guy said he would, or what's going to happen? So I'm like a pins and needles watching him, and he kind of thinks, and and then he looks back up at me and he goes, "Okay, we can both be Jesus Christ." And he walks up. And I go, "Okay, what else did they lie to me about?"
Yeah.
And then there was another one. So here's all these incidents where they just come out and say things, and psych students don't have any recourse. It's not like engineering or mathematics or any of the hard sciences where you can actually go check things out. No, you're expected to believe what they say, and they don't want to be questioned. If you question them too much, they don't like it. Especially you start getting up in the higher levels. When I was in the PhD program, boy, they didn't like to be questioned at all. You asked too many questions there, and you were in trouble. So the second one,
like religion.
So just on that, obviously the rebel in you asked that question. How would a normal kind of employee, if a patient had come out with that, they would just be told to just ignore it, basically, or?
Yeah, they just go, "He's crazy," and that's kind of what they did. It's like they didn't ask questions. They didn't ask anything about the voices. It's like, these guys are crazy. They're out of there. They're in a different world. There's no way to. That's just the way they are. It's a chemical imbalance, which is a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
And I started watching that too. So, when I first got there, I started asking the nurses and the psychiatrists and the other psychs there, why are they acting? Because it was always self-destructive. It was always destructive. They were always self-sabotaging. They were always hurting themselves. They were cutting themselves. They were attempting suicide. They were committing suicide. They were attacking other patients, and they were attacking psychiatrists at a rate that was unbelievable. And just psychiatrists. Nobody else. Not psychologists. Not psych nurses. They were attacking psychiatrists almost at the same rate they were attacking attendance staff that were there 24 hours a day.
You're talking physical attacks?
Physical attacks, which was one of the first things I noticed. You know, it's like, why are they attacking psychiatrists? Well, and the psychiatrists at the state hospital would only spend 15, 20 minutes a month with them. So I'm like thinking, what are they doing to piss these guys off in 20 minutes where they're getting slammed?
So would they attack, I don't know, like the cook or the cleaner, or in the same way? Was it just the psychiatrist?
Well, they would periodically. I mean, whoever really. So you had to be careful because once they're pissed off, you don't know what they're going to do. But you know, they would leave most staff alone. But boy, they went after the psychiatrist, and I'm like, why was that? Why is that? And I even have the rate of that here somewhere.
Well, I actually read something interesting on your website. I've made a note of it. That I don't know whether you wrote this or that many psychiatrists felt drained with working with one schizophrenic, and there's actually suicides going on.
Oh yeah, the suicide rate. It's interesting. Schizophrenics have one of the highest suicide rates of any patient population. So you would think, okay, they're not very stable. But when you look at it, the suicide rate for psychiatrists is about equal.
That was my point. That was what I was trying to get to. Yeah, I found that astounding. Because to me, obviously I work with these things as well. I obviously see how they can, flip onto other people and infiltrate other people as well. So I found that interesting, but not altogether surprising.
But, it took me by surprise. So in 1973, the Journal of American Medical Association reported the suicide rate for the general population was 11 out of 100,000. The suicide rate for schizophrenics, it's the leading cause of deaths for schizophrenics. 4 out of 10 will attempt suicide, according to the National Mental Health Institute, at some time. An estimated 4.9% of the people with schizophrenia die by suicide. Their suicide rate is 5 to 10 times that of the general population. The suicide rate for psychiatrists, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association, is 65 per 100,000, or 5.9 times more than the general population.
Wow.
And about equal to that of the schizophrenia.
So how are they passing that off, these established authorities? I guess they're not really talking about it, right? That's what they normally do.
No.
Is people like you get that job?
yeah, we get that job. Yeah, so I wondered about that, and for years I had no answers. It was only 25 years later that I found out that it was the voices that don't like the medications that these guys are given. And basically what those antipsychotic drugs are major tranquilizers. So they calm these people down. Now what the voices want to do is to stir them up. And they want to generate as much negative emotional energy as they possibly can. And then that energy disappears. And I didn't find that out for years either. And I thought at first that was due to the massive amount of anxiety that these voices cause. Because they're awful. They're constantly telling these people to kill themselves or hurt somebody else. It's just the negative things they say are just endless.
Yeah.
There's some wisdom around in there.
It's so weird. I kid you not. I don't know if you heard that, but there's like some kind of something's moving over there. There's no one else in here. It's like diver. And it's quite interesting for people watching this. I was just saying to you off air, like the height, and I get this with sessions as well. Before sessions, these voices, let's call them, or entities, whatever, will, if I can't see someone for a week or two, they will really get into people and cause anxieties and fears. And then yesterday, as I was saying to you, I had just one thing after another go wrong, and the weird things that don't normally happen. And then they were drilling upstairs, and then there was noise out there, and then we couldn't connect before. It's actually really really interesting to observe. But yeah.
Well, I know there's usually a lot of energy.
You've got a warped personality anyway.
Well, yeah, there's always interference with these broadcasts. I mean, on this subject, there's always stuff that goes wrong. And when I was talking to Freeman Fly, I mean, the electronics just went nuts. And the fellow managing those, he couldn't bring it under control. For a good while, finally, it passed. But there's always something.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so when you are with these people, so their answer is just to basically drug them. You know, if they're acting out, it's more drugs basically.
Yes. Yeah, and all those drugs do is they treat the symptoms. So they suppress the symptoms, but at the same time they do a horrendous amount of physiological damage. They kill brain cells, they rot out the patient's peripheral nervous system, and at the state hospital, these long-term patients would just shuffle around. They were like zombies. Their nervous system was so burned out they couldn't even walk with a normal gait. These medicines do a lot of damage, and they will not consider any other form of treatment. And anybody in the medical profession who starts talking like we are is immediately condemned. Dr. Omar, he's from Turkey. He was a professor in one of the big military academies in Turkey. And he watched a shaman cure several schizophrenics. So he wrote an article in a journal, and he published that. And he got attacked all up one side and down the other. So he wrote, what if schizophrenics really are possessed? He got, what did this lady say? So basically he saw this. He said, this deserves to be investigated. Okay? Now this is a response that some highfalutin professor in England, it was, what was it? One of those big universities in England, I forgot which one it was. So she wrote, this is a dumbfounding argument, and it's shocking to find it published in a post-medieval peer-reviewed journal. Lest anyone suspect me of being unfairly prejudiced against the possibility of demons, let me point out that even those who subscribe to demonic metaphysics could not be persuaded by Ermar's argument. His observation that there exist similarities between the clinical symptoms of schizophrenia and demon possession is no more surprising than the observation that there exist similarities between financial compensation for childhood tooth loss and visits by the tooth fairy. In each case, the latter is a hypothesis motivated by a desire to explain the former. If the uncanny similarity between schizophrenic and demonic possession is evidence that demonic possession is real, then the uncanny similarity between financial compensation and childhood tooth loss and visits by the tooth fairy is presumably evidence that the tooth fairy is real. And this lady goes on.
Thank you, Savannah.
And she's got no experience whatsoever. No clinical experience. She was like a philosophy professor or something like that. I wrote her back and I slammed her. I told her you've never lived with a schizophrenic, you've never worked with one, I can see you've never had a conversation with one, you have absolutely no idea what the voices say to these patients. You're closed-minded ivory tower colleagues never asked about it. You know nothing of the fixed predictable patterns run by these people. You know little or nothing about the effect of voice. And I just slammed her and said, you arrogant, egotistical fool. And waited for her to respond, and she never did. But this is the kind of response you get when you go, there are alternative therapies.
Yeah. It's all classed as woo-woo, I guess. They'll easily, put it down like that. But I wonder if these people come out because there's $14.6 billion made by pharmaceutical companies in antipsychotics. So
they have no investment in finding a cure. They make a lot more money suppressing the symptoms and then convincing the populace that there is no other treatment.
And it's the same with a lot of these other diseases, aren't they? It's all about the symptoms, treating the symptoms rather than getting to the root cause. Because if we get to the root cause, then suddenly Big Pharma's out of pocket, right?
Oh yeah, they changed. They were investing hardly any money in schizophrenic research because they haven't been able to find anything. They've been barking up the wrong tree with their chemical imbalance theory that's been proved completely fallacious. I mean, it's been proved wrong, and yet they continue to push that.
I was reading again on your website about that term, chemical imbalance. You know how they love their wordplay, don't they? It's almost like a watered down, it really just kind of softens the blow, doesn't it, when people are told that there's a chemical imbalance in their brain, I guess.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, we know what it is. But they don't even know what the chemical imbalance of the brain should be. There's a number of neurotransmitters in there. They have no idea what the chemical balance of the brain should be, or what this stuff does. For 10 years after any psychotic drugs came out, they had no idea how it worked or why it worked. And their fallacious bullcrap about we spend millions of dollars in research in these chemicals, and that's why we have to charge so much for these things.
Exactly, that's right.
Antipsychotic drugs were discovered in a lab, a dye lab in France, by accident. And the employees working in that lab would say that they were, kind of getting groggy and lethargic. And finally, one of the chemical companies, Roche, somebody or other, extracted this, and they were using it for pain and surgery for a while. They were using it for other medical purposes, and then one of the doctors think, well, this might work with calming psychiatric patients. But at that time, it was the psychoanalysts who were in control over in Europe. And they say, no, that's a bunch of crap. So this guy took these chemicals to the U.S. and arranged to give them to psychotic patients in one of the psychiatric institutions here. And it worked marvelous. I mean, they just calmed down. They were able to kind of regain control again. They were able to drug these massive populations with these drugs and calm them down. They were looking for a way to control these guys more than anything else. Because what they'd done previous to that was, it went on and on and on.
So what did they do in the old days before the drugs were about? Because I watched the link that you sent me on that massive hospital that you worked at, and a lot of people went missing and stuff. Like family members are going back there and stuff. Do you have any idea what used to go on?
Oh, that started off back in ancient Egypt, where they were boring holes in the heads of schizophrenics, the priests were. But this all started back in 375 BC with Hippocrates, who came out and went, there is a physical cause for all illness. And then it snowballed from there. So that was the takeoff. He was the father of the medical profession. So from there on, it was like, oh yeah, there is a physical. That worked fine. I mean, medicine progressed astronomically. And then, back in the 1800s, Creighton, a psychiatrist, just announced out of thin air with no research, no backing, that schizophrenia is also due to a physical cause. He had no backing for that. He had no research for that. But he announced it. So then they start looking for a physical cause, and finding a physical cause has failed ever since then. So
is there, sorry to interrupt there, but is there I don't know how much background you used to get from the patient, but in my work, I find that the more trauma a person has been through in childhood tends to lead to more heavier and more attachments. Was that a theme that you saw? I don't know how much you knew the history of the patient.
Yes, exactly.
Because
you look into their background, and usually the background's horrendous. So what these things do is they feed off of negative emotional energy. And that's where we're talking about the energetic drain. So for years I believed that drained, because the schizophrenics would talk about it. I'd see it. They'd come into the office after being attacked by the voices all night, and they were just like dishwags. They didn't have any energy. But I thought it was because of the horrendous attacks. You know, if you had these voices screaming in your head all the time, and calling your names and telling you to kill yourself, I mean, that's pretty. So I figured that was why their energy was being drained. But then one day I was assigned to the jail for the prison in the complex I was in. I always got the nastiest assignments. So this was where the worst of the worst went. One day I walked into my office, and here's a memo from the captain of the central detention unit. So this is a jail for the prison. And he wanted me to come over there because there was a floridly psychotic inmate locked into a small cell with another inmate, and the psychotic guy would stand over him and just, he'd wake up at 3 in the morning, and here's this crazy guy just looking down at him. You know, kind of spooky. And the guy was really out of it. Now the other guy, I got a inmate letter from him saying he wanted out of that cell because he didn't want to be in there with that crazy guy staring down at him at 3 in the morning. He didn't know what he was going to do.
It's interesting at 3 o'clock in the morning as well, because there's if you research different paranormal things, they say between 3 and 4 is like the.
That's exactly right, and that's when the voices hit the hardest too.
Wow.
Between 3 and 4 in the morning, and it's consistent.
Really?
Yes, really.
Wow.
So you know, I did it. I went to the computer, pulled up this the other guy, not the crazy guy, but the other guy's history. Now, what he had done, he snitched off a drug deal among the Aryan Brotherhood, one of the bigger gangs in the prison, and he was in big trouble. So he was there for protective custody. They already stabbed him once, and the security intercepted the drugs, took all the drugs, got all the gangsters involved, and sent them to prisons all over the state. Broke up the entire thing. And boy, that gang was furious. They wanted that guy dead. They wanted him dead so bad that they sent some guys got into trouble on purpose to get over there so they could get at him. That's how bad they wanted him dead. They were into other cells. They were like shooting notes under his door. You come out of there, you're a dead man. You know, you couldn't be under more stress than that. Here you have a psychotic, a floored psychotic, unmedicated, you know, with a history of violence. You're locked into a small cell with him. He's standing over you at 3 in the morning. You don't know what the hell is he going to do. And then you have these gangsters out there throwing notes on your door saying, you know, you're dead as soon as we get our hands on you. We're right here. We're waiting for you. We're waiting for the chance to get you. They already stabbed him once. So he's in there for protective custody. So I go over there, and I pull up this guy first, the guy that the gangsters were after. And, you know, it's noticeable. He's anxious and upset. And I watch him as he comes up the steps. And he just flies up those steps and then walks quickly in the office. He's got plenty of energy. You know, he's depressed. Yeah, but he's not dragging. I mean, he's functioning well. He's talking. He's expressing himself well. And I'm like, okay. He couldn't be under more stress than that. He's got plenty of energy. So after I was finished with him, let him go back, and then I called up his cellmate, the psychotic guy. He could barely make it up the steps. He looked like he had lead in his boots. He just hand on the handrails, pulled himself up, and kind of meandered in the office, sat down in the chair, and was just no energy whatsoever. And after talking to him, I mean, he could just barely speak. He was so drug out. After I got out of there, I went, that's not the cause. Anxiety is not the cause. So I'm like, and that was my theory for good. So I'm like, where am I going to go from there? So
I could use it.
Well, where's their energy going? And then
that's good advice,
previous to that,
Savannah.
I was working. What I always had in the prison was a group of prisoners who agreed to tell me in real time what their voices were telling them, as we were together in session. If the voices were talking, I wanted to know about it. So the whole time I was there, I had this select group of inmates, and it was usually 10 or 12 of them, because a lot of them don't want to talk about what their voices are saying. But these guys agreed to tell me in real time what their voices were saying. In turn, I agreed not to have them locked up or medicated or get them in trouble with security, as long as they weren't the imminent threat to themselves or anybody else. So it was like walking on the razor's edge. I had to trust them, and they had to trust me.
Was that protocol, or was that you just...
Well, no, that's not protocol. That is not protocol. We kept this very quiet.
Yeah. So you were really, you were taking risks to find out.
I was taking risks. If one of those guys, I remember one guy come in, he said, the voices were telling me to stab this guard, man. He disrespected me, and I'm like, listen, man, can you hold? If you can't keep it under control, I'm going to have to do something. And so we talked a while, and he goes, I can take it. I can keep it under control. And I said, I'm going to watch you, and I want you to check in with me every friggin' morning until I feel comfortable with you. And
hey, Sid.
So
going, Sid.
They had to trust me. I had to trust them.
Sisters with me.
Because if I had locked that guy up, and his intent was not, and I determined his intent was not to actually harm that guard after I talked to him for a while. If he had, I'd have been, and they found out about it, I'd have been fired. Why didn't you tell us? On the other hand, if he said that, the voices are telling me to stab this guy, and I said, okay, I'm going to have you locked up, that's it. That group wouldn't say anything. They didn't get around, and I would get no information from them at all.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like walking the razor's edge. And there were several incidents where we were able to work it out that didn't happen because of that.
Yeah, debating sucks.
We trusted each other.
Yeah.
And if I found out I couldn't trust one of them, he was gone.
Yeah.
So it was interesting.
So I've got to ask the next question. Is obvious. What kind of things were you getting from them? What feedback were you getting when you had disagreement with them?
Well, their voices didn't like me very much at all. So basically I would try different things to see what would interfere with the voices. And I noticed when I was working at the state hospital that the schizophrenics, when the preacher had an ice cream social in the main area there where the schizophrenics would go, and ice cream was hard to come by there. Ice cream and cake.
I'll pause it for a second. Hi, once again. Hi, Savannah. Thank you for all your likes. Hi, Sid. Whoever else might be here. The Blaze 13. I don't know if Navaki or whoever else is here. Who else is here, anyways? Just Sid and Savannah. Thank you, my two sisters and friends. This is really worth listening to.
And they would stay in the dingy wood rather than go down. And it was horrible. And I'd walk around, I saw that week after week, this happened month after month, and finally asked them, well, why are you staying up here when you could be down there having ice cream? Well, I don't like preachers. I don't like the Bible. I don't like, And finally someone said, when I try to read the Bible, the voices get louder.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, oh, yeah. And I went, well, that's interesting. So, when I hear something like that, it registers. I don't accept it as truth right away, so I start asking some of the others.
Yeah.
So all the schizophrenics on my caseload, does this happen to you? So yeah, it happened one after the other. And the ones who tried to read the Bible, the voices got louder, and they would actually say, this is a bunch of crap. And one of them, I remember, one said that the voices told him Jesus couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to help you? And it was consistent.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, they always had these dark books on their bookstands at the hospital. It was like murder mysteries and war stories, and they were always nasty, dark books. So they were attracted to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that was consistent too. And then one day, one of them came up and we were talking, and he said, well, I repeat the 23rd Psalm when they come. And he said they react to that like a bunch of worms thrown on a hot frying pan.
Wow.
Yeah, so I remembered that. And when I got to the prison, I got the 23rd Psalm and started handing it out to these inmates I was working with. And I said, I'm going to give you this. When you hear the voices, you repeat it. And next week when you come in, tell me what happens. All of them. The voices went nuts. They hated it.
Really?
They hated it. They absolutely hated it. And they hated the Lord's Prayer.
Wow.
And they hated the song Amazing Grace.
Wow.
So it's
weird.
like...
I was having this conversation with my partner yesterday. We were watching a film. It's called... I forget what it's called anyway, but it's about, possession and that stuff, because we're both Scorpios, so we like looking at the dark a lot. So, but again, in there were references to the Bible, and you hear of all these exorcisms and how they don't like the... It's weird, because I'm not religious at all. I believe in a universe, a creation, but they really don't like it, do they? I wonder what that is, I wonder what's true.
Well, you would think, why would a hallucination react like that? What if they were a hallucination? You wouldn't expect them to care about religion one way or the other. But
Maybe
it was consistent.
The energy of, I guess, I don't know, like the energy behind the message of love and peace, and
they don't want anything to do with that.
Maybe if you had another paragraph you wrote yourself, which was from you, which was along those lines, maybe they would hate that just as much as well. I just wonder.
Well, what I did do, I was always curious, So what I did is got some of these dark books they had, and I would get a paragraph out of that, and then I would take a paragraph about the same size out of the Bible, and I would tell them to read it, and then I'd take it back and I'd say, write down everything you remember about what you just read. And then I give them the dark one and say, okay, write down everything you remember about what you just read. They always remember like twice as much about the dark stuff than they did the Bible. And it was consistent.
Unbelievable.
So why would a hallucination do that? Now the other thing was the voices were always negative, consistently, unswervingly negative. They never said anything good about the patient or anybody else around the patient. It was always negative, derogatory. I have a listing of just some of the stuff they say, and it just goes on and on and on. Like, no one will ever love you. You're a piece of garbage. You're a wasted flesh. You're poor. You're going to stay poor. That's what you deserve. Neither you or your family or anybody cares about you. You're rotten. You don't deserve love. You can't do anything right. You have no talent. You're worthless. Positive people make them sick. You have no reason to feel good. You don't deserve respect. You're stupid. You're ugly. It just goes on and on. Every negative, derogatory thing you could think of.
Wow.
Now, why? What I started wondering was, what? Hallucinations are random. They're positive, they're negative, they're neutral, they're all over the place. there's nothing holding them to any kind of form, or they're just all over the place. What holds these voices on a consistently, unswervingly negative path? Something is confining them to the negativity. And what is, if they were hallucinations, you wouldn't expect them to react against the Bible or that kind of stuff. You wouldn't expect them. You would expect them to be random. They're not.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect them to run these patterns like this.
Yeah.
Now, you think psychiatry looks at this? No. Oh, we were taught in school that there are hallucinations, so there must be hallucinations because we were told by the psychiatry professor there are hallucinations, and they're due to a chemical imbalance that doesn't exist, but they didn't tell us that in school.
So you worked with a lot of people down the years, and did you find that you were the only one that was thinking can't be right? There's got to be. Were you kind of on your own path with this?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And it's weird because I hate puzzles, I hate math, I hate figuring things out. But when it comes to this stuff, it was driving me crazy. It was like I had to know what was going on, and that was the same way throughout my career. When somebody walked into the emergency room that was crazy, I had to find out what it was and how it was working. And I remember the first time I saw somebody come in with, they were smoking, what is that, bath salts or something like that.
I know what you mean, but I can't remember the word either.
But it wasn't reacting like anything I ever saw before.
Yeah.
And I was watching them, and I went, well, they're not crazy. It's not meth. And I'm like, what is it? What is this? And I finally found out it was that, those bath salt things or something.
Yeah.
Like that, this crazy drug that. But,
well, have you seen some of these drugs that are out now? I forget the terms, but like superhuman strength. These people, it's complete takeover as far as I'm concerned. Smashing into cars and like.
Meth.
Yeah, meth.
Amphetamine is one of the most dangerous drugs out there. Let's see, more people go psychotic on amphetamine than any other drug.
Oh, really?
I mean, they go crazy and they stay there. And the way they feel like, superhuman and strong and bright and everything's working and they feel great. And they come down and they're depressed for 2 or 3 days and they keep it up. And then they start seeing shadow people. These are 3-dimensional shadows. Usually they don't have any facial features. They walk across the room, they come through walls. They're humanoid in shape. What's weird is some of them have capes and hats and other stuff. And they're not just human shapes, sometimes they're other kinds of animals or some weird stuff. And they just show up, they're darker than the rest of the room, and this is consistent. And I remember when meth started coming on the scene, I was working as a contractor for the prison, and I'd already retired. And here they are the prisoners are talking about shadow people. So I'm like, well, what are the shadow people? What are you talking about? Well, they're the tree people. They're humanoid, dark shapes, and they hide up in the trees. And if you watch them too long, they come down out of the trees and they come toward you. So, okay, I logged it in, and then prisoner after prisoner who was using meth, I'd ask them about the shadow people, and it was all consistent. They all were seeing the same thing. 3-dimensional shadows with no facial features, no eyes, no nose. And then one day, one of them told me, yeah, I did see eyes. And so, what color were they? Lime green. That's weird. So I started asking them if they saw the eyes. And the eyes were either red or lime green. And what was weird was that the correlation between the patients who saw the eyes and the amount of trouble they were in with the amphetamine was consistent. The more addicted they were to the stuff, the more they saw the eyes. So I actually used that as a diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
And they all said if you start paying attention to these shadow people, they start coming towards you.
Right.
And that was usually enough to scare them off. And then one day I ran into a prisoner who said, well, I ran an experiment with them because we wanted to see if my friend, who was also a meth addict, whether we were seeing the same shadow person. So what they did is they were injecting meth. They went out to one of the Indian reservations in the middle of nowhere, and in their truck, they stopped, and one guy injected the meth and waited, and then he started seeing the shadow people. So he asked the other guy who was straight at the time, well, there's one over there by the tree. You see him? What's he doing? You see what he's doing? He goes, oh, no, I don't see him. How about that one over there? You see him? No, I don't see him. You see that one over there standing right next to him? No, I don't see him. So he injected, the second guy injected, and then he started seeing him too. So then they're going, do you see that one over there by the bush? Yeah, I see him. What's he doing? Well, he's looking at us, and he's coming kind of in our direction. You know, what about the over there, that tree? What do you see over there? Well, I see two of them over there. So they were seeing the same things.
Yeah.
You know, it was consistent. They were both seeing these things. And as they're doing this, these things are coming out of the desert by scores. And then they were completely surrounding these two guys who were fascinated with, you know, watching. And then these guys were like, holy shit, you know, we're surrounded. They jumped in the truck and they locked the door. And they're watching these things from inside the truck, like feeling safe. And then the guy said something that kind of really got my attention. He said, you know, the whole truck was surrounded. He said, then all of a sudden, the back of the truck went down like a ton boulder had hit the bed of the truck, and the front jerked up. And he said they looked back there, and the whole bed was full of these shadow people.
Oh my God.
You know, but what weirded me out was I thought they were like ghosts or, you know, phantoms or something. I wasn't quite sure. I still don't know exactly what they are. They hardly ever speak. And I've only spoken to one or two people who heard them speak, and that was freaky, really freaky. But the back of the truck went down, and they actually impacted physical reality.
Wow.
So I'm like, whoa, wait, you know, that's a whole different story there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, what did you do after they saw him in the back of the truck? He said, we put that truck in gear, and we almost smashed it getting out of there. Yeah. And I asked him, well, did they follow him? He said, no.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
But that was. I didn't know they could impact physical reality. Earlier, while I was working with some of these inmates, I was working with personally. You know, there was one that was getting better and better and better. And there were several of them. You know, as we discovered more ways to interfere, you know, like the 23rd Psalm, there were several other things that would interfere with them. Mm-hmm. And we try these things out, and you know, as we developed different ways to interfere with them, they would get pissed. Mm. So here's these guys in this little group coming in saying the voices are really getting pissed with you. They're really getting pissed off at you. Yeah. And I'm like, well, you know, tell them they go jump in the lake, soak their heads.
That's fascinating. Jerry, I think we're gonna leave. I want to go into this in the second hour, if it's okay. So okay. We're going to do a part 2 of this. We're going to get into what pissed them off, which is we'll start the next section.
What they did when they were pissed off.
Yeah, what they did when they pissed off. So we'll end this here, guys. Once again, if you're only watching this one, then please don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, comments below if you've got any questions about this, and yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
Wow, that's loud. That's loud. Anyways, who else is here? Is everybody still here? Let's keep this going. We still got Savannah here, looks like. Savannah, I'm proud of you for sticking it out. Most people don't have the patience to learn anything. Good for you. I'm very impressed. This is now part 2. Very loud intro.
Hi guys, welcome back. Hopefully you watched the first part of this interview. If you didn't, I've got the fascinating Jerry Marzinsky with me, who is a licensed...
Turn it up, buddy. You got your volume too low.
Over 35 years of experience and has seen a lot of stuff in his years, as we know from the first part. And Jerry's website is www.keyholejourney.com. We were just finished the last part on a story you were telling us, and we were just getting to the juicy parts of what you were saying to these
Thank you for
voices,
the 1,000 likes.
that might get on their nerves, let's say. Just wondered if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it started off, like you said, in the state hospital with stuff like the 23rd Psalm and prayers. That they didn't like that at all. Then when I got into the prison, I had more freedom to, at the state hospital, they didn't want you upsetting these guys. And asking questions about their voices upset the voices. So some of them did get upset.
Sorry to interject there, but did you get, from the patient that they wanted you to delve deeper when it was the patient speaking, or did the voices just automatically come in? And was there a let's say a want to know more from the patients as well?
Oh yeah, they were as curious. Most of them were as curious as I was about what the voices were. They didn't know. They fell into 3 different categories. And that doesn't have to do with upsetting them. There were 3 categories. One were the ones who knew that the voices weren't who they were, that these were entities that most of them called demons. Then there was a second group that just didn't know, and they weren't sure what they were. They didn't know whether they were them or it was their thoughts or they were something else. They were kind of on the fence. And the worst of the 3 groups were the ones that believed psychiatry, that they were hallucinating, that these things were not real, that they were hallucinations, that their minds were broken, that they were mentally ill, they were psychotic, and they had to take drugs for the rest of their lives.
Would that be most of the patients that fell under that category, or was it just? I mean, I know it's hard to put.
No, I'd say maybe a third, maybe a little more. But psychiatry would tell them this is the only treatment. This is all there is. You have to take these toxic drugs for the rest of your life, and you have to come and pay us for a appointment every month or so to get a prescription. Now in Mexico, you see a psychiatrist once, and he prescribes a drug, and then you can go get it over the counter. You don't have to go see him again. Here in the U.S., they're milking you dry. We're going to give you this prescription. You come back in a month and let's see how it works. And if it doesn't work good, we'll switch you to some other drug. In the meantime, you're paying $100, $150 for the appointment. Then you got to go to the drugstore and pay, I think it's almost $800 a month for a month of these toxic drugs. And you can get them over the counter in Mexico for $35, the same drug made by the same company. And here they are, they've got the American people convinced that this is the way it is, that you have to pay this. And most of those guys go off those drugs because they can't stand the side effects. The side effects are horrible, they're horrendous.
And I think I wrote this down earlier, that it's not just one drug that people are being described with, are they? They're being being told they need several different on the market, is that right?
Oh yeah, and it's all kinds of drugs. It's almost like they're trying to drug the entire population. And those drugs cause brain damage. They have horrible side effects. Now they're drugging children who are horrendous for you. It's like more than 7.2 million kids are on psychiatric drugs right now. 7.2 million kids are on heavy psychiatric drugs. 622,723 are under the age of 5.
Wow.
80,235 on ADHD drugs. 38,534 on antidepressants. 85,143 on antipsychotics. 389,558 on anti-anxiety drugs, and these are friggin' kids. I mean, they're trying to convince the population that they just can't cope on their own without their toxic drugs.
Have you noticed, Jerry? I don't know if it's the same in the US, but in the UK right now, there is a it's almost like a non-stop 24/7 mental health day. Everyone's got mental health problems. You know, it's being like, it's in the papers, it's in the news all the time. And I just wonder whether it's just, you know, they just want everyone on these drugs.
Oh yeah, you look at the TV. I mean, you know, half of the 2/3 of the commercials are drug commercials by these, you know, these drug companies who are making a fortune, and 6 months later you see them being sued, you know, for the toxic effects of their drugs. And there's research coming out now that these antipsychotic drugs are making patients worse. They're increasing the suicide rate of these patients. They're not allowing them to even try to cope on their own. Oh yeah, you can't deal with life on your own. You got to take these drugs. I mean, you feel bad. Yeah, we got something for it. And they make up these stupid names, and these antipsychotic drugs they have nowadays aren't significantly better than the old ones, the Thorazine that they were using years ago. They have less side effects, but they're not significantly more effective.
Yeah. And also, I think the reason they're doing this is a lot of these drugs, it makes people docile. I mean, you've spoken earlier about how they push these drugs and it kind of quells the voices, but it also makes people docile. And I think what they're looking for at the moment is the population to stand down.
Oh yeah.
Roll in all these different agendas, and obviously, you know, we know that there's this new world order and all that stuff. And if everyone's drugged up, they're not. They're certainly not going to show any resistance to what's going on. So I think you've got that plays into this as well.
Well, that's exactly right. And here's a statement made by a psychiatrist, General J.R. Reeves, a psychiatrist. He stood before the annual meeting of the National Council for Mental Health to outline psychiatry's ambitions for the future. Now, this was on June 18, 1940, so starting all the way back then. He says, we must aim to make psychiatry permeate every educational activity in our national life, public life, politics, and the industry, all of them to be within our sphere of influence. We made a useful attack on a number of professions. The two easiest are the teaching profession and the church. The most difficult are law and medicine.
Very
so look what these guys are up to here.
Mm-hmm. And so far back as well, you know, they know what they're doing years in advance, don't they?
Yeah, and you look at this diagnostic classification manual they have, you know, all these mental disorders. And it started off with 50 or so. And now it's up to, almost 300? And these are all made up. You know, every single one of those was made up.
And you talk to people and you say, yeah, but we're living longer. They're not. You're sicker longer.
They make up these mental illnesses, and then the drug companies come up behind them and create some kind of chemical to treat it. 2/3 of the people on this board that makes up these diagnostic categories, these mental disorders, are tied with the pharmaceutical industry. With frickin' frack, that whole DSM, that whole dictionary of psychiatric disorders is a work of fiction. It's all made up. There's no clinical tests for any of that. There's no blood tests. There's no blood work. There's no EKG, EEG. There's nothing. They have nothing. In medical science, you have lab work and you have these symptoms, and those symptoms are verified, and you can verify them with labs and blood work and other tests. There's nothing to verify any of this junk that they made up. Nothing. It's all a work of fiction.
You're right.
In 1952, there was 106 psychiatric disorders in the DSM-3. In 1980, there were 256. And currently, there are 297. All of them fabricated. It appears like they want to drug the entire population.
They do. That's what they're
they're,
doing.
they're labeling almost
Nation
every
of
human
addicts.
emotion a mental illness. You know, if you're sad or angry or it's this disorder or that disorder. A kid who talks back in school is what do you call it? Oppositional defiant.
No, maybe that kid just was like you and thought this authority is a load of nonsense.
Yeah, I would have been diagnosed that for sure. I have no doubt they would have diagnosed me that. You know, somebody who spends.
That's funny. Looking at that picture, imagine this kid right here is Jerry, and the guy right there is Tony. You know, just bored out of their skull. Anyways, it's true. I mean, they want us all. In fact, they pretty much turned us all into addicts. I don't know anybody who's not an addict or addicted to something in the United States of America. And when I see, like, although I spend time with my son, I have no say about, because of custody things and all that kind of stuff, because of my MS and blah, blah. Anyways, I still have spent a lot of time with him. I disagree with it when he's on medication. I know his mother gives him something similar to Ritalin or whatever, to calm him down, right? So they don't want him to be a normal 11-and-a-half-year-old boy. They just want you to sit there in that room and listen to all the indoctrination and BS. And I'm very upset about that because listen, I think medication can help. It does help us, but the reason why it helps us is because they don't deal with the problem. They just suppress the problem with the medication. So, like with all my anxieties and everything that I was going through as an adult and as a railroad or as the head holder-culturalist or whatever I was, there was times when I was on, Lexapro. And it did stabilize me. It took the edge off and helped me to focus, especially, usually ended up with a job with a lot of responsibility. It usually was one of the guys, head of the crew or something like that, right? Had to do stuff that I was not comfortable with. But, I never had a chance to do my shadow work. I never got a chance to work on myself. I never got a chance to learn to deal with the thoughts, the negative thoughts. These people have voices. Regardless, I think we all suffer spiritually from these entities, and it's from our abuse and neglect and emotional abuse and spiritual abuse and physical abuse growing up in this country, and then no one listens and nobody, like my parents dismissed me to their last breath. They never wanted to hear a thing I had to say about what I was going through in my life. And if I said anything close to what they perceived to be negative, that's what they jumped on and that's what they focused on. They said, oh, you're just being negative. You're feeling sorry for yourself and all this crap. And that's the problem. A big problem of our culture today, Western society, as we lost even what the true meaning of love is. We say we love everybody, love this, love that, love the, but when it comes down to it, love is actually showing interest in what the person has to say, validating what the person has to say, helping somebody that's going through troubling times to get through it, giving them real solutions and not a Band-Aid or drugs. Not giving just, lip service or spending 5 minutes and saying, oh, yeah, that's okay, I'm busy, I got to go back to work, or I got to go do this, that, the other. We live in a cold, heartless society and culture. And there has been improvement because it was even worse when it was my father growing up. In his generation, where you didn't talk about anything except your job. and then you went home and you stared at the television, drank a beer, or did whatever you got to do, and shove your face full of food so you could pass out and go to work the next day. Listen, we live in a very cruel society, and we have to get honest about things. Calling yourself a Christian is not going to be good enough. Saying you believe in Jesus is not going to be good enough. Don't get me wrong, I believe in Jesus. I say it till I'm blue in the face, I believe in Jesus. But the fact of the matter is, it takes more than barfing out scriptures and going to church on Sunday. You know, the whole idea was not to create all these buildings and these temples where the priestcraft could profiteer from our ignorance and misfortune. The whole idea was to help each other get through this nightmare called life. To uplift each other. Not just in food and not just in shelter, but in all things. We don't come even close to doing anything that Jesus taught to his disciples, or what even those of say James or whoever, Jude, all these different, even Paul. And when we do, it's all about religion and not about, empathy, compassion. Jesus is rather compassion than obedience. Compassion. And I want to tell you something from my own personal warfare, spiritual warfare, is that I know, and it's exhausting, but I know we all have the power to say to those voices in our head, or if something else is sent our way from the astral plane, to stand up in our own authority, recognize Jesus as well, call upon Heavenly Father, but get mad as hell against these things. And guess what happens? They get freaked out. Instead of cowering in the corner, oh my God, what is this thing? What is this weird thing showing up? You stand them down and you say, no. I have my authority. God-given authority. And you get the hell out of my life. That's what you do. And it's interesting, when you do that, these things start fleeing. The whole idea is that Jesus helped you to get you through the hard times, but it's to teach you that you have the authority. You have the capacity. You have a legal right. Whether it's a 9-foot Bigfoot in front of your frickin' face, you have a legal right to tell them no and get the hell out. Or say it's a dark shadow entity in your room. You have a right. You call upon Jesus and then you say, I demand you to get the hell out. You have no right here. I didn't give you that right. And if someone says, oh, you gave them that right, you signed some kind of contract here or there. No, none of those they're all void. It was under distress and under ignorance. Now, if you want these things, then you'll discover there's many people that cannot live without having the voices and cannot live without having these entities. Because, I'm going to tell you something. When they're gone, something has to fill it. For me, it's my hope and faith in Jesus. And, it's been very much challenged. After all my studying and research and biblical research and reading the Bible and all that, it just about destroyed any faith I have in Jesus. Religion and all that. But it's my personal experiences that matter. The same things that people try to tell me over and over and over and over again, it doesn't matter. And then they say, yeah, but what says right here, and yeah, but it says right here, and yeah, but, and I listen. I know the spiritual realm honors the name Jesus. That's what this whole thing is. We read these scriptures, it all leads to this name, Jesus. That's what it all leads to. Regardless of how you play with the scriptures and make it this fit that, it doesn't matter. it all leads to the same thing, Jesus. And either that thing is real and that entity is real, that spirit is real, or it's not. And ironically, the spirit realm knows it's real, and it doesn't have anything to do with religion. And why these voices in our heads don't want us to read the Bible is not so that we fully understand the Bible, it's that we finally realize that that's what it's really all about. And it's not about religion, and it's not about being a Christian, and it's not about anything else. It's about the fact that there's an entity, a spirit, an obedient spirit, a son of God, as they say, that the only begotten, the Messiah, whatever, all those labels. Would it be a faithful servant who knows God, knows Heavenly Father, right, and will help lead us back to Heavenly Father. And whether we talk to Jesus or not, or talk to Heavenly Father in the name of Jesus or not, it's all the same thing. It's all about getting back to Heavenly Father. These things don't want us to go back to Heavenly Father. They want us to stay in this endless reincarnation soul trap matrix where we go a certain level up into the ethereal realm, maybe the 4th or 5th level, and go right back down here again. And just because what they feed off is our emotions, our feelings. And that's, they want us. This is why they want us. It's not just because these ruling 5% of the world wants us all drugged up so we're easily controlled. The things that are controlling them want us all drugged up. These things that they've been trying to tell us is not real. The spirit realm. Yet every culture for thousands of years knew it was real. And they didn't need a Hellenistic Greek or Greco-Roman education to know the truth. Now you're talking to, I'm American. I'm a part Cherokee, Ojibwe, British, and a whole bunch of Dutch. You know what? I'm talking about my own ancestors that screwed us all up. They screwed us all up because you know what? They drank the Kool-Aid themselves with the promise of a better life through their educational system. They took us away from our full being, our full essence, our full of who we are, which is more than just a physical creature. It's more than just our physical needs. It's more than just sex and feeling good and all that stuff. There's much more to us. And none of that was shared to us growing up. And so by the time you're 18 years old, you're so confused, you have no idea what the hell's going on. You've been abused and battered this way and that way, and everyone's a victim. And the people who think they aren't victims are the biggest victims of all. And we have to do something about this. It's not about playing religion. It's not about beating each other over, beating each of us. It's not about beating each. I can't say it now. Beating each us. It's not. I got my tongue tied. It's probably the entities. Archons, get the hell out of here. Leave me alone, okay? Beating each other over the head with the Bible is not what it's all about. It's about helping each of us get through this life and develop the skills necessary, not only get through this life, to get past this. It's not about control. It's not about making money. I'm watching dudes on the TikTok, people that I've known for a while, who are literally turning their understanding of the Bible, the scriptures, and everything else into a ministry, which means they want to start their own religion. They're going to PayPal this, and you can go fund me here, and if you like what you hear, and fund me here, and it's like, oh my God. It's just a repackaging of the same crap. I'm sorry if I sound preachy and I sound passionate about this, but I've been abused by this crap for 55 years. And you know what? There's people in this room and people that will hear this that are half my age that don't have to go through this. You don't have to go through all this chaos and all this madness. And that's what's going on. We got most of the Christians out there that think that there's no such thing as a spiritual realm. And if they did think of it, it happened back then. It's not happening today. Or if they do believe it, then it's something completely different than what it really is. And when you tell people the truth about this, they all run away because, no one can handle it. Only people who are ever going to be able to handle the truth are those who are desperate enough to want to know the truth. If you think that you're walking around and you got it all figured out, and you know what, and you can't handle what I've just said, or you can't handle what's being shared here, and the stuff that I'm going to be sharing in my journey, and this is what I'm doing. I'm sharing my journey with you. I appreciate you joining me, and I hope it makes a difference in whatever person's life that is. I could care less if I don't need 2,000 or 200 people on TikTok or here, there, everywhere. I've had thousands of subs on YouTube. You know what? I learned a long time. In fact, one of the greatest gifts that was given to me was back in the 6th of January of last year. They took down my channel along with thousands of others. It just solidified the fact that that wasn't me. That was a part of me. I am greater than a YouTube channel, a TikTok channel, or this or that. This is just a platform for me to share my journey with you. With the hope that I can help you and maybe you can help me. Because we're going to need each other to get through this shit. Because this is bad what's going on here, if we're honest. There's a reason why how many of us feel like we don't fit in? We don't relate to anybody. There's a reason why we don't relate to anybody, and there's a reason why we don't fit in. And it's not just religious thing, and the religions will try to capture you and all this other stuff. We don't fit in because we know that we are aliens in a foreign land. We don't belong here. And so what do? Since we were not taught the proper tools, the proper tools to manage us, to traverse, to travel through this part of our journey, that we've not been taught the proper skills, out of frustration, out of desperation, out of just finding some kind of hope. It's funny how addiction is, and everyone I know, there's not a person alive, there's just all liars that say they're not, and they'll look down to somebody else as an addict, but everyone in this country, the United States of America and in the West, is an addict. You can count on that, and those that say they're not, all you have to do is spend a little bit of time and you'll find out what they're addicted to. We're all addicted. I was an alcoholic that drank a fifth of Jack Daniels a day and smoked whatever I could smoke along with it, and shrooms and pot and all that kind of stuff, right? And I'm still an addict. I still smoke cigarettes. I don't do all the rest of the stuff. I still smoke cigarettes. Listen, and if it wasn't cigarettes, it'd be something else. Why am I doing this? Why am I an addict? It's because I'm a product of my environment. Is that an excuse? It's not an excuse. It's me confessing who I am, and you know what? I know God. I believe in Christ. But you know what? There's a lot of things that it really is putting your faith in Christ and then somehow grabbing, getting enough cojones here to fight the fight. And it's tough. Man, it's not, you're not going to be popular by doing the right thing at all. And it has nothing to do about pretending to be a Christian. It's about recapturing as much of your sovereignty as you possibly can. Your own essence, who you really are. And this world does not, they say that they cherish those who are independent and those who have originality. Original artists or musicians or etc. No, this country doesn't. This world doesn't. You know what they do? They capture them, they ensnare them, they destroy them, and then they spit them out. And if you really are an authentic and original person, this is what's going to happen to you in this godforsaken place. This seems an awful lot like hell. They're going to freaking ostracize you. And if this doesn't work, if it gets to the point, they'll do what they did to me. They poisoned me. I was at the top of my game in art and music and all this other stuff. They took it just like that. And when I say they, I'm not just talking about the human beings. I'm talking about there's the human beings, and then there's those entities that guide these human beings, control these human beings, like avatars, and they feed off everyone's misery and suffering. This world does not want individuals. So if you're going to be an individual, you better be tough as nails. You better find a way to be tough as nails. Being tough as nails is not being mean to other people. It's just, you know what? I'm going to demand my God-given rights, my essence, who I'm meant to be. If the rest of you can't accept it, can't handle it, can't appreciate it, that's your problem. And you know what? There's the thing when it comes down to this. If you're really going to be authentic, you have to be willing to do this, even if it means you get no money out of it, even if it means you get no fame out of it, even if you get no love out of it, even if you get nothing worldly. Because you and I are more than this damn frickin' world. I'm sorry if I sound harsh in my tone of voice, but it's the truth. And while we're beaten, I mean, it's amazing watching this on TikTok and all these other channels. How we just beat the living snot out of each other, pretending we know what the hell we're talking about. Yeah, we know everything. Look at that. It's right there. Boom, right there. That book right there. That verse right there. You don't know anything. If you're trying to prove what that book has to say, you don't know anything. If you're trying to prove anything, you don't know anything. Now, you sharing stuff and sharing the truth and sharing your experience, your journey with Christ, that's a whole nother thing. Because that's knowing something. Words on a page doesn't mean diddly squat. It doesn't mean anything. I'm telling you, when you know who Christ is, that doesn't mean anything anymore. I listen to people from all different backgrounds, all different perspectives, and I mean seriously, from Satanists to Luciferians to atheists to textual critics to, disenfranchised Christians to Christians. And you know what I've learned? The only thing that matters is, do you have a relationship with your Creator? And are you being who you are meant to be? Not what somebody else said you were meant to be. Not what another human being said you're meant to be. Not what all these archons and these spirits and all these entities said you're meant to be. Are you being who you're meant to be? Are you at least attempting to get to that point? The old phrase, I'm trying to find myself. Oh yeah, all of us are still trying to find ourselves. Or we deaden ourselves. We deaden who we are through religion and through philosophy and through scientism and through cultures and what anybody else has to say. I guarantee you every single one of us has a book to write ourselves, and we don't need anybody else to do it. Pretty simple. There's a beginning and an end and a middle. We all got to learn, and we all got to help each other write our own stories, our God-given stories, and the stories that we demand. We have a sovereign right, a God-given right to demand things. Did you know that? Well, you can't talk about that. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, no, you're being arrogant. Now you're being too prideful. No, I'm not. You have a right. I have a right. We all have a right. Look, we were all thrown into this mess. They try to convince you and I that, oh, we did something terrible, or therefore we're here, or it was the sins of our ancient forefathers. No, it wasn't. No, we cannot pay for the sins of our fathers. Their own scriptures tell you that. No, you and I are a victim in this Loosh factory. We need to rise up against it. We're going to listen to the rest of this, but just listen to what this guy is saying. This guy is in this system. He's willing to challenge the system. He's willing to look outside the box, outside the box. And what did he discover about, schizophrenics? Oh yeah, they heard voices. And where did this coming from? Oh yeah. And all the drugs that they promised was going to do anything, all it did was sedate them. It didn't take the voices away or anything. What caused them to lose the voices? They put their trust in God, and they told those damn voices to get the hell out of them. They said, "I have a right to get you to tell you to get the hell out." I learned that 3 days of spiritual warfare back in 2017, when there's a damn entity walking. I'm sitting right now on the other side of that wall, due east, 5 feet from where I'm sitting right now. There's a damn entity walking back and forth on that damn porch and on the porch roof, which, by the way, my neighbor saw when he pulled in around 3:30 in the morning, in which we learned earlier about that bewitching hour between 3 and 4. He saw the damn thing, what people call Bigfoot, Sasquatch. And you know what? They left when I finally had enough. I was praying and doing this, that, and the other things. I did a lot of things afterwards too. I overreacted. Looking back, I did overreact, but I didn't know any better. But you know what? That what caused them to leave? When I got damn angry, and literally where I'm sitting right now, I was F-bombing that damn thing, and I did a little just gibberish nonsense, talking in tongues, which really was nothing. It's when I said, "Oh no, you fucking piece of shit. I've had enough. You get the hell out of here." And I've talked that way and much, much louder. And guess what that damn thing did? It freaked out and went all over the place and ran off. Why? You say, "Oh, that's not how Christians supposed to talk." Yeah, I've heard enough of how Christians supposed to talk. I ain't here to play Christian. I'm here to get back to my God and to be who I'm supposed to be. Not to be playing games to satisfy anybody. When that happened, those things took off. They did take off. And although they're in my neighbor's yards, and at times I can film them in the backyard, they're not in my place. And if I ever see them again, I can guarantee what I'm going to do. I'm going to rise up. I'm going to be screaming at those son of a bitches, and I'm going to be telling them to go all the way to Timbuktu and back. And I'm not going to be wasting any time trying to be afraid with them. I'm afraid of them. They try to do this. I've had my phases where I buy into it, I drink the Kool-Aid, and then I say no more. And this is what everyone has to do. Because guess what? Everyone has voices in their heads. Because everyone has an internal dialogue going on in their heads. So when I'm speaking out like this, I'm not just speaking to you, I'm speaking to myself. That's why it doesn't faze me if there's one person, no people, 30 people, and TikTok or whatever, because I know who my audience is. And a big part of my audience is me. It's very important to speak out. Every one of us have a responsibility to speak out the truth, so that the ethereal plane can hear it. Not just the entities that are attached to us, they hear us inside, but they all can hear us. It sucks living a life of fear. It sucks living a life of confusion. And you know what? A big part of it is Jesus. As far as help them to clear up that confusion. But the biggest thing is when you say, no more. No. In fact, as my attitude is this, just like this psychiatrist, Jerry Marzinsky's attitude is, I don't care if you got 3 PhDs. I got my son's Nana on my ex's side, she's got 2 PhDs in women's studies, right? I am not impressed. I had the opportunity to hanging out with people from the UN and all this other stuff, and other people, college professors, all due to my ex-wife, and you know what? Not impressed. And I made sure of that. I mean, I wasn't consciously really doing it. I just wasn't impressed, and I just like, well, he's just another human being that craps and shits like me, and takes a piss like me, and puts on the pants like me. You know what? Give me something that's true, buddy. I don't need all this barfing out of all this, like some parrot out of some book. Give me something that's real. If you can't do it to me, you're no more better than me. The only thing is you're more entrenched into the matrix, and you can't get out of it. You got to wait and die, wait for your tenure, and you're going to just build up a pile full of lies. That's your identity. And when you go to the other side, your ascended masters or your spirit guides or what other crap there's on the other side, you know what? They're not going to be asking you what you did or not. You're going to be reminding yourself all day long all the crap you did. I guarantee, you know how many guys I know? I'm 55 years old, and I come from a certain part of the country, a certain part of my area where there's all sorts of lawyers and doctors and professors and blah, blah, blah. And for some reason, they tolerate a guy like me. And you know what? Maybe it's because I'm not impressed with them. Maybe it's because I don't ask them for anything, and I don't look up to them. I look into them. You all have to look into them. Look into yourself and look into them. They'll be uncomfortable. They'll also be very impressed when you ask them meaningful, insightful questions. They'll also run away from you as well. Anyways, I could go on and on and on. Let's get back to this. Thanks for listening to me rant.
Prime, you would have been primed for all 297.
Oh, geez, yeah, they would have got me with all kinds of stuff. Some of the experiences I've had, I know for sure they would have labeled me schizoaffective for sure.
I'm getting more interference in here. Somebody got something through something then.
Well, they leave me alone pretty much today.
Oh, yeah, I know this is quite normal because of the work that I do as well. But,
there's things you can do about it.
I'm not scared of it. I actually find it really interesting. I don't know whether I'm just warped, but I've always been interested in the paranormal and stuff, and I don't feel, I think they're more scared of us than we are of them, and I think we're living in times where things are being uncovered, the veils are lifted, and I think interviews like this are much more. I think they're much more scared of what we're doing rather than.
Oh yeah, the very last thing they want people to know is that they are energetic parasites. Every time I was about to tell a patient, give them that information, as soon as they were aware of that, they went nuts. That was the one thing they did not want people to know, that they were actually feeding off of their emotional energy.
Well, that's their whole game, isn't it? That's
their whole game. We're basically cattle for them.
Yeah, they want us to think that we're more powerful. They're more powerful than us. When I describe to clients, they're just, like mosquitoes. You just, flick them off. I mean, some are obviously a bit more intense than that. But...
Oh yeah, it's not that easy for most people. But they don't want to be discovered at all. They want you to think that the negative thoughts flowing into your head belong to you, that they're yours. And not theirs. That there is, you look at it, you can pull back and you can watch your thoughts. You can watch them materialize in your head. You got a voice talking to you in your head all the time. Who's listening? Who's the one who's listening to that voice?
Yeah.
You know, that's you. That constant talk in there is your history, and that's them injecting negative, fearful thoughts of all kinds in there, and everybody gets hit by it. It's not the schizophrenics are the ones they're the far end of the thing, but everybody's getting hit by them all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Virtually every negative thought that enters your head about yourself or somebody else is put there by them to get a negative emotional reaction. And then if you act on it, then that intensifies, so like pouring gasoline on the fire, and they feed off of that negative emotional energy that results. That's their food.
Yeah.
They can get you in a war or in a fight. I mean, a war, the prison is a friggin' hog's trough for you.
Right.
They feed on those guys constantly. That place is constantly in uproar and fear and paranoia, and it's a pit of negativity. And then they put these psychotic guys in prison because they've closed down all the state hospitals in the U.S. They're brutalized. They're go to gangs. They get into fights. They don't give them proper medical care. They skimp on the antipsychotic drugs, and after 10 years or so with that, they're crazier than they were to start with, and then they release them on the street because they've done their time, and they wreak havoc on society. I mean, it's like I've seen some that they released. I knew they were going to kill somebody. Within 6 months, they were going to kill somebody.
Yeah.
But they've done their time.
Yeah.
That's another crazy thing. You know, somebody escapes from prison and it hits the newspaper and everybody be afraid, lock your doors. Hey, there's a murderer out there and he's walking around your neighborhood. They're releasing 25 or 30 murderers a day from the prison into society, and nobody says a word. They give them $50 and say, be on your way. When you run out of antipsychotic drugs, go to the nearest emergency room and get some more. You know, so the emergency rooms are flooded with crazy people. You know, they're trying to get these things, and most of them don't want to take them anyway. And then when they do get referred to a mental health center, it's just a big revolving door. You know, they get the meds, they go on them for a while, they stabilize them, they milk them, their insurance company or them for all they can get, and then they turn them loose when the insurance runs out. They take the drugs for a few months, and after a while they can't stand them. They go off them, they go crazy again, and then they're brought back in. It's just a big revolving door that they're not. All they're doing is suppressing the symptoms, and nothing is being treated. Nothing is being cured. They don't want a cure.
Yeah.
Look what they did with what they did. They cut down the number of skips because they were spending hardly any money on schizophrenics, hardly any, and so they got hit for that. So here's an article from, I think this came from the Wall Street Journal, and it says the wonders are the ways of Washington. They said in a single day, the federal government officially reduced the number of people with schizophrenia in the United States from 2.8 million to 750,000. With a change of the National Institute of Mental Health's website in 2017, 2 million people with schizophrenia disappeared. This is their way of handling it.
Wow.
2.8 million estimate, or 1.1 of the percent of the adult population has been the official standard for the U.S. since the 1980s, when the last major prevalence survey was carried out. The figure was provided to Congress in 1933 and used for national estimates such as the cost of schizophrenia. The National Mental Health Institute Director Joshua Gordon wrote in the Psychiatric Times that 1.1% figure is no longer scientifically defensible. In view of the most recent findings comes a 2001-3 National Comorbidity Survey, which included only those who lived at home and acknowledged symptoms of schizophrenia. It excluded those in hospitals, nursing homes, group homes, jails, prisons, homeless shelters, and most of them are in prison now. Homeless shelters and on the streets. Nor did it include the people with schizophrenia among the 29% who refused to participate in the survey. In short, 750,000 estimate, or 0.3% of the adult population, was an absurd undercount, obvious to anyone with knowledge on the subject. Why would the Federal Health Agency want to make 2 million patients disappear? Welcome to Washington. So what it is, the National Mental Health Institute spent $254 million on schizophrenia research with 2.8 million people affected. That was only $90.71 per patient. The national expenditure for Alzheimer's was 162.98 per patient, 929 million for 5.7 million people with Parkinsonian's disease. So here they're spending all this money on all these other diseases. And already they're not spending anything on schizophrenia research because they're barking up the wrong tree. They're going,
well, they know what it really is.
No, they don't know what it is. They think it's a chemical imbalance still, and that's what they're still putting. They have no idea what it is or how to treat it really. And they're not open to it. I read that letter from that professor in wherever it was over in England. I mean, so they can't conceive of a disease that does not have a physical cause or a physical cure. It's outside of their box. And shamans have been curing this stuff for thousands of years. You look at the Bible, I mean, there's like 25 incidents where Jesus cast out these demons out of people and they returned to normal. So here's a Christian society that's ignoring what the Bible is telling them. Just turning their back on it, and science is going, well, we're science, we're psychiatrists, we went to all this medical school, we know what's going on. They don't know crap. They don't know crap. All they know is how to drug people and make them sick, and there's research coming out saying that their drugs increase the suicide rate of these patients. And they're telling everybody they need to be on them if they're hearing voices. There's a lot of people that don't need to be on them. And this interferes with their recovery. It's insane. It's insane what they're doing. It's just insane.
Yeah.
But we were talking earlier about the voices getting pissed off.
Yeah.
So, every time we found something that interfered with their upsetting the patient, because their goal is to generate as much negative emotional energy as they possibly can. So what they do to people is the same thing we do to cats.
That's what it is.
They hit them, and this is everybody. Everybody has had these thoughts just barge into their head, which was a horrible, nasty thought that just shocked them. The last one I remember to me, I've got a beautiful Alaskan husky here. Sometimes she gets a little rowdy, but I was in the backyard out here. We don't mow grass. We take a machete and cut the cactus off the things. So I'm out there, trimming back the cactus, and here's this voice comes into my head. This thought comes into my head. The dog was next to me, and I'm not doing anything bad. He goes, cut her head off. I'm like, what? What? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And it's like I'm feeling guilty. I'm like, where did that come from? And I'd never do that. And then it's all this turmoil, like, and I'm like looking at them.
Which is the energy they feed on, right? So
that's it. They gotta go drink out of that one.
Yeah, exactly.
And I knew what it was. And I knew what it was. But most people don't. This thought comes in their head that punch this guy or shoot this guy or kill this person, or and it's something most people would never do.
I've had people that I work with. This Tony, I was driving down the road and this voice said, "Drive into that wall." It's not my voice, and so I know exactly what you mean.
Okay.
It's really, if you don't know this
listen
stuff.
to it again. You go to my YouTube channel.
Yeah. So they hit everybody with that stuff. So everybody's being hit. The difference between normal people, those so-called, and schizophrenics is the amount that they're being hit and the intensity that they're being hit, and they're not understanding at all what's happening to them. Psychiatry isn't helping at all.
Yeah, which I would speculate, as we said before, that if they've had lots of trauma in their life, that's when the heavier attachments get in. This, in my experience, when you're really out of your center and you're really super traumatized, maybe abuse, that kind of stuff, that's when the real nasties get in. That's what
they can smell negative emotional energy like a shark can smell blood. So they go after those people.
Cool.
And all they have to do is just trigger them a little bit. So they can go into your mind and they can pull up every negative thought you've ever experienced, you've ever had, and rub it in your face. So you look at other animals in nature, and like you watch a lion chase a deer, and the thing panics.
Yeah, Savannah, just take what you can use throughout the rest. If there's something in there that you don't agree with, it's okay. Try to find what you can agree with. You know what I mean? Sorry to be preachy, but if you go over like the Forever Conscious research channel, that's cool. And if you go to my YouTube channel, Old Religion Dystopia 2, you don't have to agree with everything. You don't have to watch everything. You know, that's okay. I mean, hopefully I'm sharing some information that's something would be of value to you in your life. That's what I'm hoping.
And runs, and finally it escapes the lion, looks around, the lion's no longer there, and then it just goes about its business. And so it didn't never happen. Not with people.
Yeah.
You know, they remunerate the same thing over and over and over again. You know, you did this bad thing, and that's these things doing that.
And it's also, if you have a subconscious wound, maybe you were abandoned as a child or betrayed, they hook in on those wounds and ramp those up. So it's almost like they know our weak spots better than we know.
They know exactly the weak spots. They can pull up every. I mean, I've had patients say that they pulled up rotten things that the patient did 20 years ago that they've long forgotten about, and they pull it up and just put it in and throw it in their face.
Yeah.
You know? And generate that negative emotional energy, and then the person becomes depressed. Their energy leaves, you know, and you can actually test that. I mean, you can have somebody, you know, hold out their arms straight out and say, you know, think of the happiest you've ever been in your life. Get a very clear picture of it, you know, and then get your pinky and, you know, tell them not to let their arm down and push down, and that arm won't go down. Then you tell them, okay, get a very clear picture of the nastiest, ugliest, rottenest thing that has ever happened to you. And when they get it clear, do the same thing, and that arm will go clear. It'll go right down.
Yeah.
So your energy disappears with those negative thoughts. And they do not want people to know that they exist. They want you to think that all your thoughts are yours.
Yeah.
But if you can pull back and you can watch your thoughts, or you can pull back and you can listen to your thoughts, they're not you.
Yeah.
So most people think they are their thoughts. They are not. And that's what these things want you to think, that you are your thoughts. And they will put these thoughts in your head that do these rotten things or things that will get you in trouble, that create more emotional turmoil if you follow them.
And you can take this to other steps as well. A lady called Eve Lorgan does really great work about relationships, how they can interfere and cause arguments between, like they can project a thought, and then all of a sudden there's an argument, and then they're getting all this food from the argument that goes on.
Exactly. They don't like families, and they especially don't like little children. Right. Matter of fact, I just got an email from Mark Gray saying that a woman in France threw her two little kids out the window of an apartment window.
Jesus.
You know, everybody was horrified over that. In the U.S., these shootings, you know, and they never ask where those thoughts come from. But before any behavior takes place, there has to be a substrate, there has to be a structure, there has to be a thought first. People don't just go off and do things without a thought, you know, providing that structure first. And it's never asked, where does that thought come from? You know, where does that thought come from? You know, and they can't conceive that it would come from somewhere outside themselves, but that's exactly what's happening. And there's a Christian mystic, a man in Swedenborg 700 years ago, who lays all this out. You know, he was able to, he was one of the top scientists of his day. He was the chief mining engineer for the Queen of Sweden. You know. He discovered all kinds of things. He was a brilliant man. At the age of, I think it was 50 or 55, he stopped all his scientific endeavors and switched over to investigating spiritual matters and how the mind worked. He was given complete access to heaven and hell. And he wrote a book, one of his most famous ones was called Heaven and Hell. And he would interview angels and demons, and those demons matched exactly what you see with these voices that the schizophrenics are hearing. It's the exact same thing. They're saying word for word.
Yeah, I think humanity's going to have a rude awakening, because it's going to at some point have to come to the realization that we're actually sharing this reality with a parasitic influence, and that's going to be a big stretch for a lot of people.
Well, you have to take control of your thoughts.
Mm.
I mean, you know, if you don't, they will.
That's right.
So they love people that are just drifting through life,
Yeah.
and their minds aren't occupied in some productive endeavor. I mean, they will go run in there and they will take over that unoccupied space.
I'll guarantee.
And then they'll start feeding you.
Also, what I found is that they will encourage bad behaviors as well. So I work with people, and it's like you remove these things, and sometimes someone who's been drinking for all their life, or they've had smoking habits, or whatever it might be, they're able to, you know, give up those things. It's almost like you remove that little voice that's saying, have that beer, have that cigarette, have that. You remove that, it enables the person, the spirit of the person to make better decisions. So that's also interesting. But I just wanted to ask you, sorry, you were going to say something?
Well, you know, you look at people who live with alcoholics, and they'll all tell you when that guy's drunk, he's not the same guy. Mm. It's a totally different person who acts very different, and is usually pretty mean. Mm. And
it's named after a mean spirit too.
I mean, I've talked to patients who they drove to another city and didn't even remember doing it. Mm. There's one guy who came into the ER and he had blood all over his bumper. He didn't know what he hit. He didn't know whether he hit a person or not. The most interesting case I ever had of alcoholism, there was an Apache. Apaches, I don't know if you know about Apaches. They're Indians in the out west that were fierce warriors.
Yeah. But this guy named the helicopters after them.
They named the helicopter after them. So there was one that was so violent up on the reservation up north that they sent him down to the prison. And he was coming to my unit, and I watched him. He didn't go to Alhambra, he didn't go to classification, he didn't go through the normal steps. He just barged right through and appeared in my prison. And I heard he was kind of a, kind of evil shaman kind of guy. And, I was interested. I wanted to talk to him and find out what all that was about, because I would never get to see another one of these guys like that. So I pulled him in to my office and told him, well, I'm going to be your psych. I'll be checking on you once a month. I'll be calling you. And boy, he looked at me like I'd rather cut your guts out than say another word to you. So, I could just feel the hatred coming off it. So I'm like, okay, I'll see you next month. And I went to the head of the Indians on the prison yard. They had each has their own little group. And I got along good with the Indians really well. I helped them out, helped them get through the fires and that kind of stuff. And I went to the head guy and I said, what's with this guy? And he said, you be very careful of him. You be very careful of him. And so I called him back, and it took me probably 6 months before I could talk to this guy for 20 minutes. And I'd leave him in there until I felt, he couldn't stand it anymore. And he started talking to me, and he would tell me about spirits chasing him, and he was able to put curses on people, which kind of got me a little, make people sick. And I said, basically, after listening to all this stuff he could do, I asked him, well, if you could do all that stuff, how come you can't stay sober? And I was like bracing myself, for him to explode. And he looked at me and he goes, because of the spirits of dead alcoholics.
Oh, right.
He said that there was a bar in Phoenix where they were piled so high over that bar. He said he could see them, and they disappeared up into the stratosphere. He said if he went anywhere near that bar with alcohol in them, they would come down and they would be, drink, drink, and then they're drinking. He said his girlfriend was also an alcoholic, and she was hit in traffic in front of him, walking across the road with a truck.
Right.
So, he said it was the spirits of dead alcoholics who couldn't get drunk in the spiritual form they were in, but they hadn't moved on. So they're still hanging around the bars and stuff,
right,
looking to get into somebody so they can get drunk.
That's why they call them spirits, huh?
Yeah, that's what they call them, spirits. Matter of fact, Van Dusen, he's a clinical psychologist who worked in a state hospital in California. So I met him and worked with him probably for maybe 2-3 years before he died of cancer. And one of his, he was talking to an alcoholic schizophrenic and was asking about spirits. And the voice said, "There's the only what was it? The only spirits here are in a bottle," or something like that. He was trying to make friends with the voices to learn about them. So he had some very interesting comments from them. He never went to try to get rid of them. He was just trying to be friendly. Matter of fact, he would give the patient an MMPI, and he would give the voices an MMPI independently. And he said the voices were much more crazy than the patient. So it's weird, but we still didn't get to the part where the reactions of some of these voices. So the most volatile reaction you'll get is when you go to tell the patient that these things are not who they are, that they're energetic parasites, that the voice they hear is not their own, it belongs to this entity, and that they're putting negative thoughts in their head to drain them. You have to be careful about who you're going to tell that to, whether they're ready for that kind of information or not. And families.
So did you have any violence towards you when you said any of this?
Well, I had one, this was another Apache. He picked up a big chair and he threw it at the top of my head. But for the most part, no, I didn't. I was never hurt by one of these guys. And that one with the Apache who threw that chair, I pushed him too far and I knew it. So, when I was growing up, part of not trusting authority was my dad. And he was a pretty violent, nasty guy. And the only way I could get back at him when I was a kid would be to push him to the brink of exploding and then back off. And so I had a lot of practice at doing that. And if you mess it up, you get creamed. That came in very handy with these guys. To push them as far as I could, and when I felt they were about to snap,
thanks.
To back off.
Thanks for still far.
So I got a whole lot more information from
there's 3 fingers
that
pointing
way
back at you.
than any other way.
Did you ever get anything like really insightful about their world or anything about what they were doing here, or did they ever come out with anything like that?
Well, you know what? Carlos Castaneda said something about that. Here's an interesting poem written by one of those guys, but it's not what I was thinking. So here's a poem written by one, a schizophrenic. We started a support group for people who hear voices on Facebook.
Yeah, so you do that for me, Cube. I pray for you too, since you're so generous. Cube, I love you. Cube, I love you. Cube, I really, really love you. Cube, I wish nothing but good and love for you. Cube, I wish nothing but love and happiness for you. Cube, I love you. Cube, I love you. Cube, I love you in the name of Jesus. I forgot to mention that, right? Cube, I love you in the name of Jesus. I really love you, Cube. I love you, and I hope nothing but the best for you. I love you, Cube. I love you, Cube, in the name of Jesus. And believe it or not, Heavenly Father loves you, and maybe even Jesus loves you, as hard as that's a belief. But I love you, and I love you in the name of Jesus, Cube. How's it going, Chris?
And this poem.
I love you, Cube.
She says,
I love you in the name of Jesus.
There is
and I
no
rebuke you back 70 times 7 in the name of Jesus.
I've lost myself again. Then after what seems like this will never end, a tiny light comes in. I hold on to this light until it brings me back to myself again.
Such a dork.
I will never give up.
Such a dork.
My walls fall down. no matter how dark it gets.
You're funny, dork. But you're a dork.
Interesting. And what about the actual drugs? Like, how did these entities react to when they were going to be drugged? Did they try and put the patient off from taking the drugs, or?
Oh yeah. Matter of fact, we were talking about the attacks on psychiatrists.
Oh yeah.
So years later, patients were telling me, I'd ask them, why do you put your drugs? Why are you putting your drugs and going insane? And they blame the side effects. So what I did there was got a list of all the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. I mean, the 2 pages of awful symptoms. And then I'd ask them to write down all the side effects, or the nasty side effects they had from their medications. And all of them had the same side effects, so I just said, you write down the ones you had. After they'd done that, I would give them both the sheets. I'd give them the sheet with the psychotic symptoms, and I'd have them check off every one of those nasty symptoms that they experienced. Nightmares, paranoia, anxiety, all these things that their voices are telling them, and all these nasty things. They'd check off a whole bunch of them. Then I'd give them both back, and I said, which one's worse? Every single one of them said the psychosis is worse. It's like a living hell. And then you'd ask them, then why do you still take your medicines? And they would go, this went on for years. I don't know. That's what they'd say, I don't know. It went on for years. And like a crazy guy, I would keep doing this, until I'm like, something's got to break. Because these people have got to know what's going on, because nobody else does. If we don't get the information from them, we're not going to get it. So it has to come from them. Yeah. So one day, a girl said, I didn't take it because the voices were telling me the psychiatrist was poisoned. And they were pointing to the side effects of these drugs as the result. So, well, you're being poisoned, and here's the proof. Here's the side effects. Some of the side effects. So here's some of the side effects of this thing. Muscle rigidity, slowed movements, dystonia, involuntary muscle movements and contractions, muscle tremor, restlessness, feeling like one needs to be in constant movement, tardive dyskinesia, neuroleptic malignant syndrome, that's life-threatening, fever, sweating, irregular heartbeat, blood pressure changes, altered mental status, confusion, disorientation, constipation, dry mouth, cardiac effects, sexual dysfunction, weight gain, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, headaches, insomnia, and all these things. Those are all side effects of this, and even these new ones. But not all of them get these things. But even so, it's almost like going up to somebody and saying, okay, you got 2 bad choices here. You can either have a bad case of the flu, or you can choose the bubonic plague. Which one you want? Most people who are sane will go, okay, I'll take the flu. These guys are going, oh, we're going to take the plague. So I'm like, well, why are they doing this? Why are they consistently choosing to go crazy again? They know what it's already. The first time it's excusable, because they take the meds and they think, okay, the meds cure this, like you take an antibiotic and whatever, the infection goes away. So they're used to a drug curing stuff.
Yeah.
As soon as they go off the drug, the voices come back, and they come back with a cure. It's almost like, hey, you messed with us, now we're going to get you back. Yeah. Yeah, so this made no sense. This made no sense. And then came the one who said the voices telling me not to take the drugs because I was being poisoned by a psychiatrist. And I don't know how many times I heard that before. I'm not taking these drugs because psychiatrists poisoned me. So where did those thoughts come from? They came from the voices.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing they go after is the meds, because the meds are calming these people down, and that's the only reason they work. They don't work because of any chemical imbalance. They're major tranquilizers. They work because they calm these guys down, and the voices have to work much harder to upset them to get that negative emotional energy that they feed off of.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's like a vicious circle.
Yeah. So, I mean, all these things are doing are suppressing the symptoms, but they're causing physiological damage in the meantime.
Mm.
So the voices don't want them taking this stuff. So the first thing they go after is the meds.
Interesting. So, I mean, I've been around people that, I think have had these kind of attachments. I think, like you said before, everyone has these voices. I think people have certain attachments, some worse than others. But I know, like, when I'm around, I guess you call them like energy vampires, but really dark ones, you can feel really drained. Did you have that? Did you feel really drained working with them?
Yeah. For years, and I didn't know why that was.
What's up, Indian
when
Roman?
Thank you for the light. First, I was like you. When I got into there, I was very curious about their world. But I'd find out that if I scheduled more than 2 of them in a day, I would come back home drained, and I didn't know why. I just couldn't get anything done, but it was consistent. So I didn't know why that was happening, but I saw that it was happening. So I either scheduled 1 or maybe 2 during a day, but never more than 2, because my energy was being drained too. Now Swedenborg talked about the same thing when he met some of these negative entities in his spiritual travels. He also talked about being drained by these things, and that was consistent.
You look like a guy that might be interesting to
And
talk
all of
to.
you ask. Matter of fact, I have some of the measurements I did here. When I saw that they were being trained, I would ask these guys. I came up with this, this real low level. I want to make sure there's no names on these things. So I asked them, how much energy you had before the voices came on a scale of 1 to 100? How much energy did you have after? Did you have while they were attacking? And so here you can see this for yourself.
Oh, right, yeah. 25%. How much energy did you have after they left? 25%. How much energy did you have while they were around? 25%. How much energy did you have before? 50%.
And there's another one. Now I did scores of these things.
You might have to hold it up a bit. After they left, 10% when voices come in, 25 before 50%. Yeah.
So they drain you. Now here's what Swedenborg said in his spiritual travels. There are a couple of statements here. Now he's talking to evil spirits on the other side in his travels. So he's in a trance, and he would go into a trance for maybe 3 days at a time, and he'd come back and he'd write about this stuff. So he's talking about these same entities. He said when they attach themselves to someone, they then induce mental torment from boredom, which they increase in breathing continually, and thus make one impatient, all of which creates intense pain and induces such weakness of the body that one can scarcely raise oneself from bed. This was shown to me by the fact that when they were present, this kind of weakness took hold on me, and when they were removed, it ceased in the degree that they were removed. They also employ many an art to pour in boredom, and by this, weakness. And so boredom is one of the big things they use. If you're bored, they'll jump in there and they'll yeah, you want something to do? We'll give you something to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I never thought of it like that, through boredom. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, people are floating. And then he goes, here's another one. He says, a certain murderous spirit was inwardly thinking nothing else but revenge. And in fact, so covertly that I saw nothing of what he was thinking. He raised up in every one of his own subjects. From my mind, he raised up whatever he could distort into evil and then into hatred. And so he fed himself continually. So here's Swedenborg 700 years ago talking about these things feeding off of him in the same manner that I experienced and that the schizophrenics experienced. And that's the last thing they want you to know is that they are energetic parasites.
Parasites. I think that's a good place to leave it because
It's a bad example of a parasite, but
we
anyways.
are more powerful than
I'll
these
show you
things.
some real ones if you want.
Obviously, the stuff we're talking about, it's not always easy, but watching our thoughts is key with all of this, isn't it?
No, it's critical. It's absolutely critical. You need to remember that every negative thought that comes into your mind is put there by them. Every negative thought, especially about yourself or others, is put there by them. And Swedenborg says none of your thoughts are them. They either come in from an evil side or they come in from a positive side. That you are like a radio that tunes to the station. So if you're entertaining those negative thoughts, if you're acting on those negative thoughts, you're moving to the negative side of the dial. And then something called spiritual gravity takes over, and you'll start being pulled deeper into their frequency. Now, if you're doing the positive, the same thing happens. Until you break so far free of them, you're not being hit by them anymore. So it's up to you. So man is the space between these two forces, and he's the one that chooses. And so the thoughts aren't yours, but you choose which ones you want to entertain and act upon.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Absolutely fascinating. Jerry, I could speak to you for 2 or 3 more hours and listen to all your stories throughout the years. I'm sure you've got a whole load more that you could tell me. But we've got to end it there, unfortunately.
No, we got a book coming out pretty soon.
Okay.
This is just kind of like a trial version, but we got the final version.
And what's the book called, Jerry?
We call it An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. So we're hoping to have that out by the end of December. And it contains all these stories and more, and what people can do about these things, which is even more important.
And
what they are and how they operate.
Where can they find the information and the book on your website?
We'll have it listed on Keyhole Journey when it comes out, the one that you mentioned. And then we'll start our own website when we get this done. But we've been putting a lot of time into it to make sure it contains the kind of information that will teach people both what these things are, how they operate, and what they can do about them.
And is there any other way that we can support you in the work that you're doing? Do you have a YouTube channel, Facebook, that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, I got both Facebook and YouTube. I think I sent you the links. I haven't spent much time on the YouTube. Matter of fact, the last probably 10 interviews I haven't put on there yet. We got to catch up with that yet. We've been working on the book so far. Sure. But all you guys listening tonight, you're supposed to be here. You were pulled in here to listen to this from whatever you were doing in life, and it's no accident that you're hearing this because you're ready to.
Yeah.
And thank you Tony, for giving us the opportunity to get this information out.
No, you're welcome. I'll put all the links to your website and everything down below in the description so people can find you. And thanks to you, it's not an easy topic. We get hit with all this energetic interference and, it's a difficult thing to talk about going against the grain. So thank you so much for what you're doing. And go on.
Right, after you get the information out, if your audience has any questions, I'd be glad to come back and answer them.
Yeah, sure. No worries. We'll do a follow-up one for sure. And
okay.
I don't know if he's done that or not. They come from different perspectives. Let's see. Jerry's. That's not it. Jeez. The audio for the conversation is super low. And anyways, it is what it is. Anyways, Jerry Marzinsky. If you go to my YouTube channel, eventually I'm going to start interviewing people again. I'm actually going to be interviewing him as well. It's interesting. He was talking about the Apache Indian and alcohol and all these ensnared, trapped spirits that yearning for a drink of alcohol. And so then I decided to look up the spirit that this demon of drugs and alcohol. And first thing that comes, of course, is the alcohol. But then I look over to the other side from the A to Z demon names and lists and descriptions, the hellhorror.com. And the very first one is Aamon, Aamon. And it's interesting because 2 nights ago I was interacting with some Satanists that I met through Gnostic Informant. And he goes by that name. And I was like, I was asking myself, where did I get that? Why does he have that name, Aamon? Well, it's interesting how synchronicity works, and now I know why. And you might ask yourself, somebody who believes in Jesus, why are you hanging out with Satanists? Well, you learn a lot from those who perceive themselves as my enemy. Notice how I said, those who perceive themselves as my enemy. See, I know who my enemy is. We've just been talking about my enemy. The same enemy that's your enemy. And all the rest of our enemies. And they live in the ethereal realm. They infest us. They infest the air. They infest everything. It's interesting you talk about demon possession and all that kind of crap, which is not crap really. It's legit. I shouldn't say it that way. And how they infest things. Well, here's something that, going back to this trees, and that trees are living entities, and just like us, they're made up of like a little more, just about the same makeup as far as water. Trees. And what you're looking at right there is not an owl. And that's something popping out of a tree that the Native Americans and even our ancestors from Europe and etc. all told us about these, the green man or the tree spirits or tree boogers or tree apes, and everyone thinks it's a joke until you open up your eyes and realize none of this is a joke. You just have to have eyes to see. Now, if you look in the middle of that hole in that tree, there's something popping out of that, and something is pretty damn big, and it's not an owl. But if you notice a little bit, it's got like a black cone shape. Head, deep brow, brow. So here's the cone head. You actually probably his fingers right there. There's a bridge. Deep recessed eyes. The nose. You might have heard of something called Sabai, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, blah blah blah, Grassman, and everyone thinks it's about some hairy primate, whatever nonsense. And everyone told us there's over 1,000 indigenous tribes in North America alone have told us that they're spirits, and they come in and out of the trees. Yeah. Now, if they're able to infest the trees, what makes you think they're not able to infest you and I? Now, this is not a belief system. It's a belief system if you are under that spell and you think it's a belief system. So go find out. Knowing is more powerful than the belief system. It's my neighbor's yard. Anyways, and you don't have to believe me. Like I said, go find out for yourself. Don't develop your eyes. Start talking to Lord of all spirits. Ask him to reveal things, and he'll reveal things. You get yourself a decent camera, P900, P1000, something of that quality. Start taking decent pictures. Train your eyes to see between pareidolia and not. Be able to distinguish what is popping out of a tree and what's not. And you will figure it out. And you won't need my permission or my acceptance or anybody else's acceptance. You will know. Don't need me. You will know. And then you will understand what spiritual warfare is real. It's not something religious. No, religion hijacked that. Religious people don't own this. No religion owns this truth. And we have allowed religion to keep us from knowing that truth. So we got the very first demon in this list of A to Z is Amen. This guy that's out there is who's blatant Satanist. This Fastain seen his take on scriptures. Do I agree with what he's saying? It doesn't matter. But no, I don't. I say, why does it matter? Because he's going to believe and he's going to buy into what he wants. Because if you're operating in a base, low levels, you're going to buy into all this stuff. You know, what's going to be more important to you is putting your appendage between your legs in something's whole. That's what's going to be more important. You're going to be out there trying to make yourself feel good, even if it's at the expense of others. Now, when you allow the true living God and you get rid of some of this shit that's inside of you, it's not just psychological. There's a lot of work that's involved. You can get some of these entities out of you. I haven't been in a relationship for a decade now. I'm not telling anybody else what to do. I'm glad I have not been in a relationship for a decade. I needed to have a relationship with me and with God. Women don't have that hold on me anymore. And it's not their fault. This just is what it is. We live in a Loosh factory in which these archons, these spirits, these demonic entities, these jinns, these unclean spirits, you can name whatever you want to name it, feed off of our misery, our pain and suffering, and they love it. And this is not religious. So just throw out religion because it doesn't have anything to do. You know what? If there was no religion in this world, it'd still be going on. In fact, religion is one of those traps that keep you from knowing the truth. And that's the brutal fact. Now we're going to listen to Bob Monroe talk about the Loosh. If you haven't heard of it, it's time to hear of it. Because this is what these entities feed off of.
That's not wild? My percept is that it fits. I got another road, and when I overlay the two, one of them is certainly wild. I blanked. What road is that? The one we got in the TSI brochure about the places and things we would be visiting. All about Earth and humans, how it got started, what it's for, all that stuff. I closed, then opened slowly.
Yeah, bush monkeys.
They don't match up? Here, get your own percept.
That's what
He
happens.
tossed a road at
They
me.
become bush
I took it
monkeys.
curiously and unfolded it.
I guess I was a bush monkey.
Someone
once.
somewhere,
I like that.
or
bush
both,
monkeys.
in millions or uncountable, requires, likes, needs, values, collects, drinks, eats, or uses as a drug a substance ident Loosh. Electricity, oil, oxygen, gold, wheat, water, land, old coins, uranium. This is a rare substance in somewhere, and those who possess Loosh find it vital for whatever it is used for. Faced with this question of supply and demand, a universal law of somewhere, someone decided to produce it artificially, so to speak, rather than search for it in its natural form. He decided to build a garden and grow Loosh. In the natural state, Loosh was found to originate from a series of vibrational actions in the carbon-oxygen cycle, and the residue was Loosh in varying degrees of purity. It occurred only during such action and secondarily during the reactive process. Prospectors from somewhere ranged far and wide in search of Loosh sources, and new discoveries were hailed with much enthusiasm and reward. So it was that someone in his garden changed all this. Far off in a remote area, he set to work on his experiment. First, he created a proper environment for the carbon-oxygen cycle where it would flourish. He created a balance with much care so that proper radiation and other nourishment would be in continuous supply. He then tried his first crop, which actually did produce Loosh, but only in small quantities and of comparatively low grade, not significant enough to take back to the heart of somewhere. The problem was twofold. The life period was too short, and the crop units themselves were too minute. This brought about limits in quality and quantity. as the crop had no time to generate loosh in such close tolerances. Moreover, the loosh could be harvested only at the moment of termination of the lifespan, not one moment before. His second crop was no better, if as good. He changed the environment to another part of the garden where the density was gaseous rather than liquid, and the higher density chemicals formed a solid base, and thus were still available. He planted numberless units in many varieties in a new form, with a great increase in size, some many thousands of times larger and more complex than the simple unicellular first crop. He reversed the carbon-oxygen cycle. Yet all had a basic uniformity. Like the first crop, they would reseed at regular intervals and terminate their lifespans automatically. To avoid the uneven distribution of chemicals and radiation which had been prevalent in the first crop, he immobilized the second crop. Each was designed to stay principally in its own section of the garden. To this end, each was given firm tendrils which burrowed deep into the more dense chemical matter. Attached to this was a stem or trunk which helped elevate the upper portion upward for its share of needed radiation. The upper portion, broad, thin, and somewhat fragile, was designed as a transducer of carbon-oxygen compounds to and from the crop unit. As an added thought, brilliant color radiators accompanied by small particle generators were mounted on each unit, usually near the top and symmetrically centered. He set up circulating patterns in the gaseous envelope around the crop, principally to aid in the reseeding process. Later he discovered that the same turbulent effect served as a means of harvesting the loosh. If the turbulence were violent enough, the crop would be blown down, the lifespan terminated, and the loosh would discharge. This was especially useful when an immediate loosh supply was desired at a particular point rather than at harvest time. Despite all of this, the second crop was most unsatisfactory. While it was true that a much greater quantity was attained, the unrefined loosh produced was of such low grade that it was scarcely worth the effort. In addition, the growth period was now too long and no increase in quality resulted. Some vital element was missing. Someone hovered over his garden for a long period in study before he attempted the third crop. It was indeed a challenge. True, he was partially successful. He had grown loosh. Yet the product of his efforts fell far short of the wild, uncultivated variety. It was inevitable that he perceived the answer. The third crop was living proof of this truth. The original carbon-oxygen cycle must be included. Mobility must be restored. Both factors had shown great promise in high-grade loosh production. If size could be added to this, much could be accomplished. With this plan in the forefront, someone removed various sample units from the first crop, which was still thriving in the liquid portion of the garden. He modified them to exist and grow in the gaseous area. He adapted them first to take nourishment from the second crop, which he permitted to abound for this very purpose. Thus it was that the first of the mobiles, the third crop, came into being. The mobiles took nourishment from the second crop, thus ending its lifespan and producing low-grade loosh. When each huge mobile terminated its own lifespan, additional loosh was produced. The quantity was massive, but the frequency pattern of the loosh residue still left much to be desired. It was by accident that someone came upon the prime catalyst as regards loosh production. The monstrous and slow-moving mobiles had a lifespan far out of proportion to their nourishment input. The growth and life termination process was of such length that soon the mobiles would all but decimate the second crop. The entire garden would be out of balance, and there would be no loosh production whatsoever. Both the second and third crop faced extinction. As the second crop grew scarce, energy needs of the mobiles became acute. Often two mobiles would seek to ingest the identical second crop unit. This created conflict, which resulted in physical struggle among two or more of the ungainly mobiles. Someone observed these struggles, at first bemused with the problem, then with great interest. As the struggles ensued, the mobiles were emanating loosh, not in fractional amounts, but in sizable, usable quantities and of a much higher purity. He quickly put the theory to the test. He removed another unit of first crop from the liquid garden area, redesigned it for the gaseous environment, but with one significant change. The new mobile would be somewhat smaller, but would require the ingestion of other mobiles for nourishment. This would solve the problem of overpopulation of mobiles, and at the same time would create good quantities of usable loosh during each conflict struggle, plus a bonus if the new class of mobile terminated the lifespan of the other. Someone would be able to transmit to somewhere practical amounts of reasonably pure loosh. Thus it was that the rule of the prime catalyst came into being. Conflict among carbon-oxygen cycle units brings forth consistent emanations of Loosh. It was as simple as that. Satisfied that he had found the formula, someone prepared the fourth crop. He now knew that the third crop mobiles were too large and too long in lifespan to be ultimately practical. If grown in large numbers, the entire garden would have to be expanded and enlarged. There was not space enough to grow such massive single units and the proportionate leafy second crops to support them. Also, he...
Oh, sorry about missing that, if you're still there. I don't know why you feel anxious. Actually demand that you don't want to be anxious anymore. Also, it could be many factors, from coffee, too much cigarettes, too much not eating well, worrying about your future, worrying about the wrong things. It could be spiritual. It could be multiple factors. I don't know. Almighty Creator God, and true and living God, help up Savannah in her anxiety. Please help her, relieve her of her anxiety, and grant her peace, and give her courage to deal with her problems. Thank you, God.
He reasoned correctly.
Oh, I know why I want to stop this too. He's talking about, right, if you do these different units, he's talking about, other people will call this evolution, all this, from microbes to then small animals to now he's talking about dinosaurs and eventually to human beings. And so let's read these units. Okay.
That more rapid and increased mobility would expand the conflict factor with the resultant higher Loosh output. In one single motion, someone terminated the lifespans of all the lumbering third crop mobiles. Going back to the first crop in the liquid area, he modified and expanded them into a multitude of shapes and sizes, gave them complex multicellular structures of high mobility. He designed them into a pattern of balance. There were those that ingested a second crop type of carbon cycle unit, basically immobile, as an energy source. There were others, very highly mobile, who required for energy the ingestion of other mobile modified first crop units. The completed circuit operated quite satisfactorily. The stationary second crop modification in the liquid environment flourished. Small, highly active liquid-breathing mobiles took nourishment, ate the second crop modification. Larger and/or other active mobiles consumed for energy the smaller plant eaters. When any mobile grew too large and slow, it became an easy target for the smaller mobiles, who attacked in voracious numbers. The chemical residue from these ingestive actions settled to the bottom of the liquid medium, and so provided new nourishment for the stationaries, modified second crop, completing the circuit. The result was a steady flow of Loosh, from the lifespan termination of the stationaries, from the intense conflict among the mobiles to avoid ingestion, and finally from the sudden termination of the lifespans of such mobiles as the inevitable product of such conflicts. Turning to another portion of his garden, the gaseous area with a dense compound base, someone applied the same techniques with even more advanced improvements. He added many varieties of stationaries, original second crop, to provide sufficient and diverse nourishment for the new mobiles he was to create. As in the other garden area, he made such mobiles into a balance of two species, those who ingested and drew energy from the second crop stationaries, and those who required other mobiles for sustenance. He created them in literally thousands of original types, small, large, yet none so large as the third crop mobiles, and ingeniously gave each some appurtenance for conflict. These took the form of mass, elusive speed, deceptive and/or protective coating and/or color radiation, wave action and particle perceptors and detectors, and unique higher density protuberances for gouging, grasping, and rending during conflict. All of the latter served neatly to add to and prolong the conflict periods, with resultant increase in Loosh emanation. As a side experiment, someone designed and created one form of mobile that was weak and ineffective by the standards of the other mobiles in the fourth crop. Yet this experimental mobile had two distinct advantages. It had the ability to ingest and take energy from both the stationaries and other mobiles. Second, someone pulled forth a piece of himself, no other source of such substance being known or available, to act as an intensive ultimate trigger to mobility. Following the rule of attraction, someone knew that such infusion would create in this particular mobile species an unceasing mobility. Always it would seek to satisfy the attraction this tiny motive himself engendered as it sought reunion with the infinite whole. Thus, the drive for satisfaction of energy requirements through ingestion would not be the only motivating force. More important, the needs and compulsions created by the peace of someone could not be satiated throughout the garden. Thus, the need for mobility would be ever present, and the conflict between this need and that of energy replacement would be constant, possibly a continuous, high-order Loosh emanator if it survived. The fourth crop exceeded all of someone's expectations. It became apparent that a consistent, useful flow of Loosh was being produced in the garden. The balance of life operated perfectly, with the conflict factor producing immense amounts of Loosh and a steady supplement brought into being by the constant lifespan terminations from all types of mobiles and stationaries. To handle the output, someone set up special collectors to aid in the harvest. He set up channels to convey the raw Loosh from his garden to somewhere. No longer did somewhere depend principally upon the wild state as the principal source of Loosh. The garden of someone had ended that. With the success of the garden and the production of Loosh by cultivated means, others began to design and build their gardens. This was in accordance with the law of supply and demand. Vacuum is an unstable condition, as the amounts of Loosh from someone's garden only partially met the requirements of somewhere. Collectors, on behalf of the others, actually entered the garden of someone to take advantage of those small emanations of Loosh overlooked or ignored by the collectors of someone. Someone, his work completed, returned to somewhere and occupied himself with other matters. Loosh production stayed at a constant level under the supervision of the collectors. The only alterations were ordered by someone himself. Under instructions from someone, the collectors periodically harvested segments of the fourth crop. This was done to ensure adequate chemicals, radiation, and other nourishment for the younger oncoming units. A secondary purpose was to provide occasional extra amounts of Loosh created by such harvesting. To reap such harvest, the collectors generated storms of turbulence and turmoil in both the gaseous envelope and the more solid chemical formations that were the base of the garden itself. Such upheavals had the effect of terminating lifespans of multitudes of the fourth crop as they were crushed under the rolling base formation or smothered under waves from the agitated liquid area of the garden. By peculiarity of design, fourth crop units could not maintain their carbon-oxygen cycle surrounded by the liquid medium. The garden pattern of life might have gone on thus throughout eternity, had it not been for the perception and inquisitiveness of someone. On occasion, he would study samples of Loosh from his garden. There was no motive in doing so other than the fact that someone may have held a remote continuing interest in his project. On a particular analysis of a Loosh sample, someone had casually examined the emanations and was about to return it to the reservoir when he became aware of a difference. It was very slight, but there it was. His interest centered immediately. He looked again. Woven delicately in with the more common Loosh emanations was a slender fragment of purified and distilled Loosh. This was an impossibility. Purified and distilled Loosh resulted only after the wild state Loosh had been processed many times. The Loosh from the garden of someone required the same treatment before it could be used. Yet here it was, so finely graded in its refined radiations that it could or would not return into compound with the raw substance. Someone reaffirmed his tests, and the result was still positive. There was a factor in his garden of which he was unaware. Quickly, someone left somewhere and returned to his garden. Outwardly, all seemed the same. The solid base gaseous areas of the garden were an endless carpet of green reflection from the thriving second crop. The modified first crop in the liquid area was in perfect accord with the action-reaction law, a division of cause and effect. Someone perceived without delay that the difference, the source of distilled Loosh, lay neither with the first nor with the second crop. He found his first momentary touch of distilled Loosh emanation in one of the units of the fourth crop, which had by then filtered throughout the plantings of the second crop. The flash came during the unusual action of this unit as it entered into a life-terminating struggle with another fourth crop unit. This alone would not create distilled Loosh, someone knew, and he probed deeper for the source. It was at that moment that he discovered the difference. The fourth crop unit was not struggling in conflict over an ingestible remnant of a weaker fourth crop unit, or a tasty frond from a nearby second crop stem, or to avoid termination of life and ingestion by the other conflicting fourth crop unit. It was in conflict to protect and save from life termination 3 of its own newly generated species huddled under a large second crop unit waiting for the outcome. There was no doubt about it. This was the action that produced the flashes of distilled loosh. With this clue, someone examined the actions of other fourth crop units in the garden. He found similar flashes when other fourth crop units took the same action in defense of their young. Still, there was an inconsistency. The sum of all such flashes of distilled loosh emanation from all such actions by the current fourth crop would not amount to half of the total he had found in the sample from the reservoir. It was obvious that another factor was present. Systematically, he hovered over the garden, extending his perception to all areas. Almost immediately, he found the source. High-order distilled loosh radiation was originating from one particular section of the garden. Quickly, he hurried to the spot. There it was. An experimental modified fourth crop unit, one of those that contained a piece of himself in its functional pattern. It was standing alone under the leafy upper portion of a large second crop unit. It was not hungry. It was not in conflict with another fourth crop unit. It was not acting in defense of its young. Then why did it emanate distilled loosh in such great quantity? Someone moved closer. His perception entered into the modified fourth crop unit, and then he knew. The unit was lonely. It was this effect that produced distilled loosh. As someone drew back, he noted another unusual inconsistency. The modified fourth crop unit suddenly had become aware of his presence. It had collapsed and was jerking in strange convulsions on the solid base formation. Clear liquid was being expelled from the 2 radiation-perceiving orifices. With this, the distilled loosh emitted became even more pronounced. It was from this that someone propounded his now famous DLP formula, which is in effect in the garden at this time. The balance of the story is well known. Someone included the fundamental in his formula. The creation of pure distilled loosh is brought forth in type 4M units by the action of unfulfillment, but only if such pattern is enacted at a vibratory level above the sensory bounds of the environment. The greater the intensity of said pattern, the greater the output of loosh distillate. To put the formula into effect, someone designed subtle changes in his garden, all of them familiar to every historian. The splitting of all crop units into halves to engender loneliness as they sought to reunite, and the encouragement of dominance of the Type 4M units are but 2 of the most noteworthy innovations. As it appears now, the garden is a fascinating spectacle of efficiency. The collectors have long since become masters at the art of the DLP formula. Type 4M units dominate and have spread throughout the entire garden, with the exception of the deeper portions of the liquid medium. These are the principal producers of loosh distillate. From experience, the collectors have evolved an entire technology with supplementary tools for the harvesting of loosh from the Type 4M units. The most common have been named love, friendship, family, greed, hate, pain, guilt, disease, pride, ambition, ownership, possession, sacrifice, and on a larger scale, nations, provincialism, wars, famine, religion, machines, freedom, industry, trade, to list a few. Loosh production is higher than ever before. Click. I was closed tightly, turned inward, stunned. My first reaction was there had to be some mistake. This was not the story history of Earth. BB had mixed it up with some other port of call on their cruise schedule. Yet as I ran the road again, the overlay of what little I knew of Earth's zoological and human history was uncomfortably accurate, albeit from another perspective. The food chain of Earth's ecobiologic systems had been well established. Knowing this about Mother Nature, some of the hardcore philosophic speculators had often pondered where the human animal fit in the process. The downside was obvious. Who ate us? Before it had been just that, speculation. Now, BB opened, plied. You get the percept ramp? I dulled. Yeah, I get it. Well then, BB went on. What's loosh got to do with learning? I opened slightly. And you got the rope before you came to Earth. BB smoothed. Like I gave you, it was in the TSI cruise brochure. It was in with hundreds of other ropes we got before we left. I opened more, but tightly. Where did the brochure come from? Why, yeah, from the cruise director. Where did he get it? BB flickered. I don't have a road on that. He just dumped them on us and rolled. Here's the exciting and interesting stops we'll make on the cruise. I got a good percept because it was the last one we'd visit, so it was the last route we got. That's why it was so clear. Some of the others are dim because they were in the middle. Not the Earth wrote or humans. It's all clear, not wild at all. I hardened. And where did the cruise director come from? BB alighted. Oh, he and the rest are a bunch of curls from the system next to us. Why did they offer the cruise to you in KT-95? BB smoothed. Well, it was sort of a trade. We do it all the time with systems near us. What did they get in trade? BB lighted. Games. Games. We got more games than any system, 4 skips in any direction. I turned inward and closed. It was getting too hot to handle. If the rope was real, a huge if. I began to drop off. Anger, the feeling of being on the receiving end of a huge deception. The resentment at being manipulated, wanting to strike out at those who were conning me, us, all humans, who were taking something from us without our consent or permission. What happened to the freedom idea? Was every thought and action we took guided, no, directed and controlled just to produce more loosh, whatever that was, for a breakfast table or a fuel tank in a somewhere? And what could I do about it, even knowing? I dulled deeply and dropped off more and more. Hey, Ram! BD was fading rapidly. Where are you going? Return to the physical was near instantaneous, exactly as if I had pushed the panic button, which I had not done for so long. Strong sense of tiredness, both mental and physical. Neglected to check time of return. Low energy, no desire to do anything. Unable to get to sleep. Got up, went to the kitchen and made a cup of coffee. Sat and stared at the cup. With no energy or desire for exploration during the 2 weeks following, in a depressed state, the only production that surfaced was, "It is sunset."
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you are going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
If I can't go, will you take